Okay, hello and welcome everyone to Liam's Lyceum. I'm Liam, aka Hemar, as it goes around here. And today I am doing a special video with T. It's been a minute since he's been on the channel.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to talk about some Arthurian lit. So thanks, T, for coming on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's a fun topic. I enjoy it.
Yes, you seem like the person to have on.
Oh, there's people who know more than me. On BookTube, there's people who know more than me.
There's people who know more than me, but I know you. Anyway, that's
important.
Yes. So, honestly, like I told you this already, I didn't really have a big outline of what we're going to discuss in topic questions or whatever. But I did want to start with a little reading of Idylls of the King. Why? Because it sounds fun. And it is actually the very first, I don't know what you'd call these, actually, chapters or something, branches, whatever. The Coming of Arthur. For many a petty king ere Arthur came, ruled in this isle, in ever-waging war, each upon other wasted all the land. And still from time to time the heathen hosts swarmed overseas and harried what was left, and so there grew great tracts of wilderness, wherein the beast was ever more and more. But man was less and less till Arthur came. But first Aurelius lived and fought and died, and after him King Uther fought and died. But either failed to make the kingdom one, and after these King Arthur for a space, and through the puissance of his table round, drew all their petty princedoms under him, their king and head, and made a realm, and reigned. Anyways, so a nice intro, I feel like, for Arthuriana discussion, the coming of Arthur. So Arthur has now come to my channel. Anyways, here we are. So what's funny though is I actually haven't read this whole thing. I just got this a couple days ago. But it's interesting because it's written in verse, but it's just the meter, really, not rhyme or like alliteration or anything. So which is still something. It's like a Paradise Lost in that sense. But yes. Anyways, speaking of Alfred Lord Tennyson, do you know that apparently Arthurian stuff wasn't really popular from like the end of the Middle Ages until the Romantic period? Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
You didn't know
I did not know that. I can kind of see why. And it does. It really does. But it really does go away and then come back into culture, like over and over again. That's happened since it started. It's just it cycles through. But
yeah, I think it has some good longevity. Now, of course, Arthuriana is like, I don't know, what is Arthuriana? Stuff about Arthur.
But not totally, because there's lots of, like, for example, Leoness by Jack Vance. That's not about Arthur at all, but it is considered Arthuriana because it's related to the Arthurian myth. And I think that's more of a definition, is related to the Arthurian myth in some way, which then you get into things like Wheel of Time, which is really not worth considering part of Arthuriana, but
it does have elements.
Lots of things. It has elements, and there's lots of books that have elements. Even what was I mentioned several. Oh, even Rune Lords has some elements of Arthuriana in it to some degree. But
yeah, Wheel of Time was an interesting one. It really doesn't feel like Arthuriana at all, but the names are there pretty much.
Right.
And you get like the kind of aspect of once in future kind of going on, but yeah, doesn't really read like Arthurian besides that.
There's definitely better Arthurian series.
Oh yeah, well yeah, there's better anything. Whatever you label Wheel of Time, there's something better. So
some people might get mad at us for this, but I think you and I are some of the only people who feel pretty strongly that it's not that great of a series.
It's very mid.
Yes.
I finished the series in 2018. And after I finished it, I was like, you know what? I'm not sure if that was worth it. So, which I shouldn't feel after reading a 14-book series. So
no, absolutely not. Well, like I've mentioned to you, and I think I mentioned it in my video that I filmed yesterday and edited today. I liked book 1, and then I really didn't like anything until about book 6, and then I haven't really liked anything until about book 13. So,
yeah.
but it's just there's a lot of in between that everybody else says is, oh, this is fantastic, and then they say, oh, and these books are the slog and they're horrible, they're so slow. And I'm like, I like the slog more than most of the other books in the series. But,
yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people have like there's a good variety of opinions.
yeah,
I'm really mixed on most of the books, right? Like I thought book 1 was okay. I thought book 2 was okay. Book 3 was bad. Book 4 had like some moments, I guess. In book 5, the one big battle in book 5 I thought worked better than a lot of the other big battles in the series. Book 6 I thought was really boring. And then book 7, 8, 9, and 10 are super forgettable. I really I know this is what we're starting our Arthurian discussion on, but I really disliked like book 9 in general. It has this everyone claims like one of the best like epic endings in any book ever. I'm like, that is like the most like anticlimactic thing like that could have happened for what actually happens. Like it's insanely boring. Or they'll say like, oh, Do My Wells. I'm like, Do My Wells was like really tame, like not even very entertaining. Like, what are you guys talking about? Right? Like I've read way better stuff.
So, the ending of Eye of the World is fantastic, but then the rest of them, they're just like, a little, they're okay.
Yeah, they just have this like really short, almost always climax that really doesn't pay off the rest of the book.
Right.
Because it's like there's nothing happening a good chunk of the books, right? They're in the circus and they're complaining, and very obvious things are happening and they're missing in it, and everyone hates each other and they're not talking to each other, and it's like lame and stupid, and then there's like this weird polygamy thing going on. Anyways, so I mean, like, it's just a bunch of like whatever. But I mean, there's some names in there that are Arthurian. Actually, there's that green guy
or whatever.
Yeah, isn't there the green guy in the first book?
Yeah,
not bad.
Never appears again.
Guy. Yeah,
I think he dies in the first book. Is why he never appeared.
I think, spoiler alert.
Anyways, I think just called the Green Man, but
yeah, but okay. The reason to get back on track of Arthuriana,
right?
But he's green. Anyways,
7 minutes of bashing.
Yeah, but like the Green Knight. There's something interesting actually. We probably talk more about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but I've more recently been reading Percival romances. Hey, look, there it is. I don't actually have like anything on hand.
I don't have anything else. Yeah, I don't have anything else on hand.
T sleeps with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Yes, I do. Well, no, it's actually just it's I haven't read Pearl or Sir Orfeo yet, and so that's why I still have the book by me.
Yes.
It's
I haven't read those as much, but they're good. Sir Gawain is a great one. It's one I've read a few times. But this it's very normal actually, if I'm remembering correctly, in medieval just romance in general, that there is like a person that is very specifically colored. Like there's one color about them, right, or whatever, that they can only really be killed by whoever's destined to kill them, like pretty much, right? And so you see this in Percival, because in almost all the Percival romances, like the first thing he does, well, not completely. Percival is a ding dong. Okay, if you read any of the Percival romances, it's pretty much a coming of age, all the Percival romances. And he's a doofus because he hasn't learned anything, right? So that's pretty much the whole point of the story, is he's going to go learn things. His mom tells him very little. He kisses this girl, he sees knights, he thinks they're God or whatever. He's like, which one of you are God or whatever. But the first person he kills, he fights, is this red knight, right? And then he wears his red armor afterwards, right? So Percival wears the red armor afterwards. So but it's very particular that Percival is meant to kill this red knight. Whatever that guy's name is, it changes in the romances. I think because Chrétien de Troyes doesn't actually name him, maybe. So, but anyways, that's just what came to mind, is that this is red stuff. I like Percival romances, actually. It's interesting because I think a lot of people associate the Percival romances are Grail romances. That the Grail romances, at least when they started, are Percival stories, right? But now people associate them with Galahad for the most part. I think that's from the Lancelot Grail like vulgar cycle, though, that Galahad is just like literally created. He's not in anything before that, which happens in these Arthurian stuff anyways. And
well, I mean, you want your best knight, which is Lancelot, to be able to go after the Grail, but he can't because he has some other problems that he needs to
yes.
deal with, and so they say, "Oh, let's make his son go after the Grail instead."
Yeah,
Basically,
which is fine. I haven't read that one yet. I'd like to read it. I'm trying to get through more of the Percival stuff first, and then I'll get into the Galahad Grail stuff.
A lot of people don't like Galahad because he's too goody two shoes.
Well, that's
And
kind of the point, though.
that's kind of the point of him. And yeah, it's like Captain America. You like Captain America because he is that thing, not because he's something interesting. It's like you want that specific type of character, which is why you like those type of characters or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, you can see a little bit of this mix in I'm reading Perilous Vows now, which is like one of the weirder Percival romances. One, because his name's not Percival, his name's Perilous Vows. Anyways, but and it's just weird.
P.
Yeah, it's close enough. It's a weird romance. It's got a bunch of like interesting. Actually, it's the first place the questing beast shows up ever.
Okay.
Actually, and it's not. There's not the questing beast you're thinking of. It's actually benevolent, and it's like small, like a fox or something. And so, but it's got like other weird things. Like this guy has a shield with a dragon that breathes fire on it. You know, that's pretty dope.
Well, that's in Merlin too.
Yeah, so I mean, like,
similar.
Perilous Vows has this interesting stuff that's not in the other earlier Percival romance stuff, but you can see it, right? Because Lancelot shows up a lot. Actually, just shows up in Perilous Vows,
right?
Which he doesn't show up in, say, like Parzival or Percival by Detroit. So, and there's Gawain is always there for some reason.
Well, he's the main. Him and Bedivere were the main knights until the introduction of Lancelot into the myth.
Well, see, I've never been a big Lancelot fan, to be honest.
It depends on how he's portrayed.
Well, he's not terrible. He's just like
I like him in Merlin.
Yeah, I like him in Merlin. I think Lancelot is, I don't know, he's okay. I think that kind of just irks me when people are like, "Oh, who's the best knight?" And then most people are automatically just going to think of Lancelot, right? He's got the lamest name.
Yeah.
He doesn't show up until later. Obviously, very French. We don't like that. No, I just like Gawain. That's really the only problem. Yeah, no, Lancelot's fine, and because of Lancelot, we get Galahad, and I like Galahad too.
Right.
Galahad is an interesting character because he does seem to be partially based off of a historical person, Iltud, funny Welsh name, but not really at the same time. So, anyways, you'll see Iltud actually pop up in some of the historical retellings. He's actually I think, in the Pendragon cycle, but as a very minor character. He's not really major at all.
Galahad is in the Arthurian, in the Pendragon cycle as well.
Yes.
But I don't know.
Rothavad or something like that.
Yeah. And then Gawain is Guacamole or something like that.
Or something like that. That's the Welsh version of their names.
Right.
I don't actually know if Galahad that's a legit Welsh version of him, but Gawain
who knows? It's just what's the author's name? Lawhead. It's just Lawhead's version, and that's fine.
I am very forgiving with Lawhead because he's obviously just trying to tell his story. He does some things I'm just like, this is a little silly, you know, or like he gets like some things completely wrong. Like at one point they're eating potatoes, and I'm like, they didn't have potatoes in early medieval.
Potatoes yet? Not yet.
Like what the hell? And I don't understand the way he spells Frank and Saxon. It really doesn't make any sense to me. But that's not a big deal. I can't like gripe about that. So
he has an interesting setup for his story, and then he tells his own story that he wants to. So
it starts with Atlantis, so of course it's very interesting.
I love Atlantis, and that's one of my favorite myths as well. And he made those sections so boring. Like I don't know why they were as boring as they were, but I wanted to love them. But they were rather boring for me.
They're not that great. You know what's funny? What I'm sad about though is that Karis is pretty much in the whole series, right?
Yeah,
and she doesn't really do much at the beginning of the first book because she's young, right? She's just a character that's acted upon,
right?
And then she has this banger opening for part 2 in book 1, right? This like
I
the bowl
know.
scene. It's
It's
so
so
stinking good. It's the best thing in the whole series. I'm just gonna say it right there. It is so well written. I'm like, holy
Mhm.
crap, this is good. But then she's just like really not that cool afterwards, you know. And
Yeah.
even then, it's just like, oh yeah, Atlantis gonna explode. Woo,
Yeah.
let's get to the boats. You know, like it's like it's I mean, like, and so I'm glad she's still in the series, right? Everyone literally every time someone meets her, they're like, wow, she's so beautiful, or they think she's like the Virgin Mary at one point, right? And so I mean, like, but I like
Yeah.
that she's there. I'm glad that it's kind of a spoiler, I guess, but I'm glad she doesn't get killed off. There's no reason for her to get killed
Right.
off, but like she's also just not important really at all after that first
She
book. So
yeah, not really. Uh, I mean, she is, for some reasons, but not as a main character after that first book. But
yeah. Yeah, she does do stuff.
yeah,
She is there and has
she is
some
still technically
role.
the Lady of the Lake and
Yeah.
fills that role, but which
Yeah, it is an
that
interesting
character
take on Lady of the
doesn't have.
Lake.
Yeah, and the Lady of the Lake classically doesn't have a role anyways.
Yeah,
She
that's
just
true.
her hand comes up out of the water, grabs the sword, or gives it to Arthur to begin with, one of the two, or both,
Yeah.
and that's it. So it's
Yep.
understandable that she doesn't have a huge role.
This is very true. So, uh, I don't know. I don't know. It was just like to read that scene and I was like, wow, that was awesome. And then just to feel like afterwards, I'm like, okay, well, that's a little
Yeah,
shame. But that series seems like it's trying to do so much. You get that pretty often in the series actually, where you get something and then you just don't really hear about it for a
mhm,
while or like ever again almost. You know what I mean? Like the feeling of the series changes throughout each book and often throughout each part of the books, right? It's just
yeah,
like, yeah, we're not gonna talk about that for hundreds of pages now or whatever, right? So
right.
like um
Well, it's also almost impossible to keep track of any sense of a timeline in the first 2 books. Like,
yeah,
you'll get a name mentioned, you're like, "Oh, I know that person's from history, so I can kind of cross-reference based
yeah.
on dates of when that person was supposed to be alive," but there's no sense of time. I mean, like, I have no idea how old Kairos was in the first 2 parts. Well, in
Yeah,
any
that
of the
is
books. When she
yeah,
first appeared, I was thinking, "Oh, she's like 12 or something like that,"
yeah.
and then the second part, she's like 18 maybe? I don't know, or
Yeah.
22,
It threw me
somewhere in
for a
there,
loop.
and then you get to the end and, like, she's still the same age, except that she's
She
not
has the
because
hot
years and years
retaliation
and years
now.
right,
Right, I
which
know,
is
like,
I
what
don't
is
know,
she, like,
it's
30 and this
weird.
guy's, like, 15 or something? Like, I'm
I know,
confused. And then it turns out they're pretty much immortal. I'm like, "Oh, well, that was not
right.
established before."
Yeah, it wasn't. We have no knowledge of that at all, but, yeah.
Yeah, so
I
like,
do like
oh,
the Fisher King. I do like that myth, and so I like that the Fisher King is used more in this series than I've ever seen in anything else, so I'm okay
yeah,
with that, but
yeah, well, you gotta read the Percival romances because he's always there.
okay. Well, yeah,
Um,
and that he is.
but
He's integral to the
the
Grail
Grail
quest,
quest,
and
yeah.
so, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. The one thing I think that is okay, I finished Grail, by the way.
Okay,
So I need to
that's
read
good.
Aurelia and maybe Avalon, I
Yeah.
guess, maybe.
I need to
But,
read a review, but I don't know when it's gonna be because I don't have an
yeah.
audiobook for it yet, so
Yeah. Um, those Pendragon and Grail are like
they'd be better if you slotted them into their sections
right.
in Arthur. Yeah.
Yes, but as far as I'm aware, that's not really Lawhead's fault. As far as I'm
It
aware,
yeah,
the
it
publishers
sounds
kind
like
of
a publishing
yeah,
interference, yeah,
yeah, which is unfortunate. But it does
unfortunate.
make those books not work as well in some sense.
Right.
I still really like Grail, and Pendragon had its moments. Grail's just fun
Grail, the
because it's
biggest
much more fantastic
right.
than the
The
two
the
like
the
Arthur and
biggest
Pendragon are.
problem with Grail was that it's the Grail quest where you already know the end of it because
Yeah,
you've read Arthur.
right,
And the whole third part of Arthur takes place after the Grail quest and after it's been
right,
achieved and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, well,
yeah,
I know the fates of all these characters. I know what happens with the Grail. So it almost doesn't add anything to the series by its inclusion, which
right,
is really unfortunate because I feel like it should have. And there's a lot of really interesting things to it, um, in and of itself as a story. So yeah, I don't know,
yeah.
unfortunate, but
It is unfortunate. I still liked it, but it's
yeah,
I think one thing actually that the Grail does really well um, is really contrast. I don't know if he's trying to, but it really contrasts this the women characters in the books. you have the bad ones. They're all beautiful, right? The good and the bad are all
Right.
beautiful, pretty much.
Yep.
It's not going for the ugly evil trope or whatever. But it's the bad ones are beautiful in a lustful sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're seductive.
Yeah.
The good ones are beautiful in a very modest sense,
Right.
right? And I think it's a really well done contrast, actually.
Yeah.
So, but it is a I don't know, and I think one thing I don't really like about the Pendragon cycle is just how inconsistent Merlin is.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you're just like, wow, this guy's he's got it. And other times you're like, wow, this guy's just like literally not paying attention or something. What's
Right.
going on with this? Like,
Well,
so,
he talks about that in whichever one it is that he narrates. The second one he narrates, I think, is Pendragon.
Pendragon, yeah, he does. Yeah.
He right at the beginning, he's telling he's telling the story, and he's like, this is the one where I make mistakes. Basically, this is the story where I
Yeah.
mess up, and that's basically how he starts the book, and it's interesting, and it works actually for the character. It's helpful because he is so often viewed as this infallible mentor who can't make mistakes. But I mean, after Merlin, he messed up big time and had a lost, I don't know, 300 years maybe of timeline in there somewhere, and it just
Inconclusive.
yeah.
So
It's interesting, and it does help to understand his character a bit more. But
yeah, yeah, I don't know. Overall, I did really enjoy the
yeah.
Pendragon cycle. I mean, it's not perfect. Obviously, there's things to
Hmm.
pick at or whatever. I did really enjoy it. I did like Pendragon's take. Um, he is very interesting because that he comes off as okay. So if you read the medieval sources, they're all very much high or late medieval. They're very Christian, right? And I mentioned this
Hmm.
in my weekly updates. I mentioned on my Discord server.
Yeah.
That Pendragon, he really puts the Christian aspects in there, but he also very much comes off as like this guy is like supporting Christianity. Like Pendragon,
Right.
like Lawhead himself is like, yeah,
Yes.
this is the good stuff, guys, or whatever,
Uh-huh.
And he gets a little bit more nuance in I think Pendragon when he has those bishops that are like not very, good bishops or whatever, right? But for the most part, it's like, you know, Jesus is cool, right? And Jesus is literally where they're getting these magical powers in some sense,
Hmm.
right? Like the bad guys literally can't stand it when you say the name of Christ, right? And so it's like, which is fine, Like
Yeah.
I was like, okay, like it made more sense to me than say something like Bernard Cornwell, okay? Because I read him recently too. I know you haven't read his Warlord Chronicles,
Not
but
yet. I've got the first one. I just haven't read it yet.
yeah, Cornwell definitely seems like he has a bone to pick with Christianity, and
Probably does.
yeah, right. And without, I realized that the high medieval stuff would be considerably later than any historical sense of Arthur, if you want to,
Hmm.
whether Arthur was real or not is likely not. Anyways, but heavily debated. But it depends on who you ask, and depends on when you ask who. Anyways, no. And but Cornwell is like, oh yeah, if you're looking at 5th century, especially 6th century, depending on where you're going to put Arthur, um, those Britain were almost certainly more Christian than anything else.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I
he's
mean, there
just
was
like, it
already.
doesn't make any sense. A lot of the stuff doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. But whatever. As long as people are telling a story, I don't mind things like that. It's when they are just doing it for the sake of doing it that I get frustrated.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it comes out very
and that's
cartoony.
with anything. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
with anything. That's my problem with modern day Hollywood or filmmaking or anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it is. It's just
Well,
all we're trying to say something, and we're gonna
yeah.
make a movie about it instead of
Right.
tell a story first. That's far
Yeah.
more. But
That's the thing with Cornwell. Cornwell, what I got, the opinion I have of him is that he's a really good writer. Okay. He writes some really good
yeah.
stuff. The narrator is technically okay. The narrator actually doesn't make much sense. So he's pagan really through most of the book, and so it's like, oh, and I had someone in the Discord mention that, oh, it could just be the pagan
Mhm.
perspective is what skews
Right.
Christianity this way. But really, even if you had it in a third person perspective, the Christians are all cartoon villains, pretty much. They're all a bunch of ding dongs, right? And just like comically evil in like the stupidest
Mhm.
ways, right? I mean, now you'll get the pagans are kind of really comically dumb in some ways too, right? You get that more later in the series. Though. In the first book, the Christians are dumb and evil, and the pagans are the cool, edgy, cool kids, right? And and then in the second book, the whole second book is about Christianity versus paganism, and it doesn't work at all. The second book is garbage, to be completely honest. And so like it's just continuing this stuff from the first book, but it's so dumb it doesn't work. The third book is better, the first book is better, I guess, in some sense, but it's just I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense. Historically, like it's ahistorical in that sense. So when you're gonna Cornwell is not writing historical fantasy like Lawhead is, he's writing historical fiction,
right?
And while you can, I mean, we have very little records. Even if we have good amount of records, we're not going to know a lot of the day-to-day stuff, like how people perceive things or how everything was handled, right? You have a lot of wiggle room, but it just doesn't work. It just comes off as way ahistorical. And if you're writing this as historical fiction, I think you're going to mislead people in some sense. Now you could say that doesn't matter, right? Because it's just about King Arthur anyways, who's almost certainly not real or whatever, right?
At least not in the iteration that we like to think about.
Right, yeah. But then to me, it just comes off as like very 90s edgy. Oh, there's this obvious Christian church analog, and it's obviously evil or whatever. In this case, it's literally the Christian church, right? But I mean, like, so and I think that's just lazy. That's a lazy trope. We don't have it so much these days, but it's still lazy, I think. If you have a bone to pick with it, that's cool. That's fine. You know what I mean? But like, these characters you're writing almost certainly wouldn't feel this way, right? I think. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, T. But I think Poge does a better job. He also writes a historical take on King Arthur and his retreat to Avalon and whatnot. And he is very much not Lawhead, where he's like, yeah, Christianity is the good stuff, guys. Is very much not Cornwell, though, where he's just like obviously against it. He's just kind of like, this is how they probably treat it, right? And it's much more realistic in that sense, which I appreciate.
So I think I know the correct pronunciation of that name. And it's because I know somebody with a last name that is spelled like that, and it's Pogue.
Pogue? Okay.
Yes.
I can never trust these people because I know half the time I talk to someone who has like an interesting name and they say it wrong. Right? Like it's like, I know you're saying it wrong because I know the freaking word or whatever in this language.
Right.
And so,
but at least according to how this person pronounces their last name, with that is spelled the same, it's pronounced Pogue.
Okay, so, interesting.
Anyways,
I probably
do want to
reach out to the guy and be like, "How the hell do you say your name?" It just looks like it should be easy to say, and I'm just like, I've never seen this name in my life.
Edge.
Yeah, I don't know how to say this.
Yes,
but his books. I'm in the middle of Strife of Camland still, and
is there 3 of them or just 2?
So there's 2 out.
Okay,
but when you look on his website, you have a 3rd book, and it doesn't have like the cover revealed yet. It's one of those like it's wrapped and you can see like the title or whatever. But that sounds like, when I read the blurb of that one, that sounds like it's like a prequel almost.
Okay,
right? And maybe that it's not even a novel. It almost sounds like it's maybe like a bind up of like novellas or something. I don't know, right? So I don't know. The story follows Gawain. Actually, Arthur's not the main character, which is actually really normal. I've discovered.
Yes. Yeah.
That Arthur almost like is never the main character.
Arthur is hard to make interesting,
I guess. I don't know. That's an interesting
or at least from his perspective, from Arthur's perspective, he's hard to be interesting. Because we do like every other. I mean, even trying to think what stories are actually from Arthur's perspective, because even Arthur and Pendragon, those are both told from different people's perspectives.
Yeah. I know one. But even a lot of the medieval stuff, it keeps on hopping around. The Percival romances are interesting, even just the Grail quest in general, because it's really more Arthurian adjacent. It's not as adjacent to say like Lyonesse, but it's like Arthur like hardly even stars in them mostly. It's kind of like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, actually. Like you see Arthur at his court, but then that's about it. So,
have you read Tristan yet?
Tristan. Oh, the actual people. I forget their names right now. Thomas of Britain and the other guy, the guy.
Gottfried von Strasbourg.
Yeah, I have not. No, that is another one, along with the Galahad stuff, that I'll probably get to after I read the stuff.
Tristan is pretty much always been considered a part of King Arthur's court, except that King Arthur doesn't even exist in Tristan.
Oh, really?
So it's just, or at least not. He doesn't make any form of appearance in that book.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, like, it's a great story, great medieval, but it's
yeah.
But it's good. There's
I like
a lot of
medieval
good stuff.
obviously.
Well, no, not that it's bad. It's just like it's very clearly got the medieval influences and ideas that they like to incorporate into their stories, and and it's fine. It's just if you just look at the story itself, I enjoy the story. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. After I read that one, I want to read the Middle English. There is one Middle English Tristan story, as far as I'm aware. There's only one Middle English Percival story, and I've read that already. It's a parody, actually. It's kind of funny. But it's this is my problem. I get on tangents way too easily. But Percival rides a pregnant mare, and he thinks it's a stallion, right? Or at one point, he after he gets the Red Knight's armor, he meets the Red Knight's mom, and she's like, "Oh, I thought you were dead. Everyone says you're dead," but not realizing it's not her son in the armor or whatever. And then she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a witch. Remember I told you though, if you died, I couldn't bring you back or whatever." And then Percival's like, "Oh, she's a witch." So he stabs her with her lance and throws her into fire. And I'm just like, "This is great." So, like,
they can be wild.
They're oh man, they're great. But
they're great.
Yeah, I want to read the Middle English Tristan. It's called Tristram or Tristram.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's called in Mallory even. But I think it's actually written by Thomas the Rhymer. Supposedly the Middle English one is written by Thomas the Rhymer, which is dope. So Thomas of Ercildoune or whatever. That's cool. I want to read that. Anyways, so if you don't know Thomas the Rhymer, you can look him up afterwards. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah. It's good. So I read Tristan with Tristram of Thomas, which is the Strasbourg and the Thomas one. For my Arthurian
Thomas the Rhymer, Thomas of Britain or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Thomas is very common.
But I read that one for my Arthurian lit class after I'd read Mallory, Le Morte d'Arthur. I think we read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight again. I don't remember, but I think we did. And we read Colwick and Olwen, which is a old Welsh tale. Super short one, wild. A lot of fun. But it's I think those, I'm trying to remember if we read one more. We may have read one more or something. I don't remember. But that was a super fun class, as you can imagine. Sitting there reading Arthurian literature and then discussing it is lots of fun.
That does sound like a really good time. I have read Arthurian lit for class before, but only, it's funny, in 2 classes technically. But one was a Tolkien class, so I read his translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The other one was a medieval lit class, so I read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But what's her name? Was her? I read her translation, whatever her name was. So it was the same stinking story. It was the same semester. I literally read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight twice in the same semester for different classes, and I had already read it before. Actually, it wasn't even my first time reading them. So that's the only Arthuriana I've ever read for class.
Yeah, I want to read. So I've read Tolkien's Sir Gawain. I don't remember who the other Sir Gawain is. I have it. It's up on my shelf. I can't see it. Hiding behind all my books. I can't remember the name. Might be a Thomas. But anyways, I want to read more. I've got Tolkien's The Fall of Arthur, which I believe is something that he wrote. I don't think it's something that he translated. I think it's something he wrote. He didn't publish it. It was published after posthumously? Is that the word? Correct pronunciation of the word?
I believe that is the correct pronunciation.
And then I've also got, so I think
Marie Boroff. Sorry. Anyways, continue.
Yeah. I recognize that name. I also have, it's not by Tolkien, but it's the Geoffrey H. Smith's The Spring Harvest, and the first one in that is an Arthurian poem. So I want to read that as well.
Oh, is it? It's been a while since I looked at that.
I believe it is. I got it. I think I got it this year for Christmas, or I guess last year for Christmas, and so I want to read it. Haven't got to it yet. I'm slow. I read too slow. It's like you
It's
reading 5 or 6 Arthurian books last week, and I read 3 pages.
Okay. They're starting to get mixed up in my head, too, so it's okay.
Yeah, well, that's all right. What was I saying earlier? You'll be fluent in Arthuriana pretty soon here.
I hope so.
I have an interesting. It's like I don't know. It's an old sci-fi, vintage sci-fi that's Arthurian, and it's like
it's Andre
Arthur
Norton
on another world. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Norton I find very, 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 very boring. But I haven't attempted to read that one anyway. So
well, I just thought the idea of telling an Arthurian story in a sci-fi setting is interesting, and I'm not sure how it would work.
Yeah.
And I found it. I mean, it's like $1 at the used bookstore, so I was like, well, can't pass this up, because at the same time I got the Blue Earth or something like that, a Jack Vance novel. So I was like, oh, I should pick that up too. So I don't know. It's up on my other shelf behind me here.
There's lots of good Vance.
Right there. But I can't see it. I can't read it, and it's hiding behind the Legos. So
oh darn.
Just terrible.
Oh, that's awful. No, oh no, no. Vance is good. Anything Vance is good. Yeah. But I do like the retellings. I think the retellings can. I think honestly, I would say historical retellings seem to be pretty popular over fantasy ones, from my experience. I mean, there's some I haven't read. Like I haven't read The Mists of Avalon, and I don't want to.
Right. I don't think I want to either.
And is that one fantasy, or is it completely historical? I don't even know.
I don't know.
I don't really care.
I mean, they're all fantasy, but
right. Well, yeah. But then like, because Pendragon Cycle is historical fantasy, so it does have fantasy elements. Mm-hmm. Warlord Chronicles is definitely historical. Arthurian Saga, which is the Pogue, whatever his name is, mm-hmm. Is historical. Sword at Sunset. Oh, I have that book like right here.
Is that that sounds like a Lieber? No, it's a
Rosemary Sutcliffe. Yeah,
it sounds like a Lieber title. Lieber, whatever.
Best. It does, because he's got a lot of sword books. Can't blame you there. But this is actually one of the books that I have that it was not mine originally. It's my dad's. He took an Arthurian class, so he had this. And I saw it on a shelf, and I was like, "Hey, that looks cool."
Yeah. And I've read Eagle of the Ninth, and I need to read more by her. But.
Yeah, so this one's one of her rare adult novels. Most of her books are written for a younger audience, or more like juveniles, mm-hmm. or whatever. And I read this in high school. Okay, so I read this after I had read Lord of the Rings. The next year, I finished Lord of the Rings as a freshman, and I read this in my sophomore year. And it was awesome. Okay, this helped me fall in love with reading as well. It is a very historical approach, but this is what I meant earlier when I said I know of one. The main character is Arthur.
Okay.
So I don't remember a lot about it because it's been a minute, but I remember really loving it, really digging it. So Sword at Sunset. And in fact, I think a lot of the historical King Arthur stuff that come later are mostly inspired by it, not probably based on, but inspired by this one, because this is a pretty big and pretty early historical attempt at Arthur, because really before Sutcliffe, I don't even really know if you have any. In fact, I think this is more of a response to T.H. White, which I also haven't read, but I'm also not that interested in reading.
I thought you'd read that one. I
read Lamort around the time you were reading Once in Future King?
Once in Future King.
Yeah, and I was just like, that doesn't sound really good. That's a lot of the problems actually you have with some of the stuff, is that a lot of it is just the same. And maybe that's why like historical takes are more popular these days, because they're different. They have to be different.
Yeah.
Right. When you read, like I've heard, didn't Steinbeck, right?
Yeah, he has one as well.
And I hear it's very much the same as something like Lamort. It's very similar.
I
so I don't really
believe he
care to
was
read it that
trying to
much.
modernize Lamort for his audience, is
Yeah,
what it
see, that
was.
does not sound interesting. No offense, Steinbeck.
So
So, but yeah, so like, but I think there still could be a lot more done with
mhm,
Arthuriana. Like we've talked about this, right? Like I think making like a buddy, not a buddy cop so much, but like a Fafhrd and Grey Mouser type of thing going on
mhm,
with Arthur and Merlin. Make it kind of historical, but have fantastic elements in there. Honestly, I
right.
think that could work really well. you know,
Well, I like how Gemmell did it,
yeah,
or Gemmell or whatever.
I
I
think it's
feel like
Gamble.
his take was interesting and unique. Obviously, he wasn't following Arthur; he was following Uther, which that's unique in and of itself.
Yeah,
Um, his his approach to setting and characters like the immortals and all that stuff was different than anything that I'd seen
mhm.
before, and so that made it interesting and unique on its own. Um, Speaking of Lancelot, I'm not sure what I feel of his take on
Oh yeah,
Lancelot.
have to read book 2 because I think there's one more book
Yeah,
in that little. It's the duology, I guess, but
yeah.
yeah, that was a
But,
like what ending. So, which is kind of funny because Arthur is a character that you pretty much has to be good. He doesn't always come off as that in some of the stuff, right? He slaughters
mhm,
lots of people in Lamort, for example. But
right.
uh, but Uther often comes off as like a jackwagon,
Yeah,
which kind of works. I felt like in Ghost King. Um,
yeah. I feel like his character developed naturally for an Uther character. For an
yeah,
Arthur, it wouldn't have worked, but for an Uther character, it
yeah.
felt natural, felt fitting for Uther. But
It's got some interesting stuff in that book, though. Definitely, yeah,
yes,
definitely a more unique spin on it. I think it
yeah,
works fine.
yeah.
So it was an
And that's
interesting
the
one.
thing. It's one of those myths that you can take and twist around and do whatever you want with it, and it's still gonna work because it's different. Like, oh, it's not over there. Where's it at? The one Wizard Knight. Um,
Yeah,
that's its own take on the Arthurian myth as well, and that's not even like pure Arthuriana, but it ties into it, especially Wizard.
yeah.
There's a lot of influences and references and stuff like that, and it you can just do whatever you want to and stick some Arthurian names in it, and it becomes
Yeah,
Arthuriana. So
yeah, that one.
all the time.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Wizard Knight's way better than the real time.
I
Anyways,
agree.
the Wizard Knight is weird because it reminds me a lot of Percival actually, because the main character is pretty much a child, right? But he's
Mhm.
really effective as a knight, and in that sense, it's very Percival. But it does, yeah, it definitely touches on some Arthurian stuff. There's really kind of two Arthurs in the Wizard
Yeah,
Knight. There's Arnvor or whatever his name is, and then there's the other guy that is a
King
huge
Arthur.
spoiler that I can't really. That last sentence, if you remember the last sentence, how he signs off.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I don't
Anyways,
remember
so like,
exactly what it was, but I remember. Yeah,
so
remember reading it.
I was like, wow, okay.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's I like the Wizard Knight a lot, actually. I think, like I said,
Yeah.
I think in context of reading like Percival stuff right around the same time I read those, I think it worked really well. In some sense, it's like Arthurian adjacent.
Hmm.
Yeah, well,
Right.
very Arthurian adjacent because it doesn't actually reference really much Arthuriana at all. It just kind of does obliquely, kind of. So like,
Yeah.
but so
A couple events, mostly just names of characters though,
yeah.
and misspellings of the names of characters at that.
Yes, yeah, it's great. Those are good books. Wolf was really good.
Yeah.
Um, I'm glad I got you to read Wolf and Gemmell. Anyways, so
Yes.
we just have to have Arthur involved, and T will read it apparently. No,
Yep. Pretty
so
much.
yeah, so I'm glad. No, but I think
And
he
so
actually
you
does have
let's see.
more Arthurian stuff. I think his Castle View by Wolf is kind of Arthurian as
Yes.
well. So,
Yeah.
which I
I
have not
think
read.
that's more directly Arthurian from what I
Mhm.
understand. So I
Yes,
want to read that one. But
but I think kind of what this brings up into my mind is that Arthurian stuff is kind of, I think Philip Chase put it this way once, that is it's communal property, right? And that's pretty normal of
mhm.
medieval stories in general, right? Like you look at like Troilus and Cressida or whatever by Shakespeare, and
Mhm.
that is not a Shakespeare original like heck, Shakespeare hardly had an original thought, you know. So like, and so I mean, like, you know, like Chaucer had a Troilus and Cressida, right? And he's not the first, obviously, anyways, because it's an antique story. But Arthur really moves into that spot when romances like come in, right? Because you have like that, you have the Welsh tales, you have the Celtic tales and stuff, but they're kind of far removed in some sense. I mean, it's really nice seeing like the elements of them there. Like you can always find them, right? But in a lot of ways they're not highlighted. Then you move into like the history stuff, like Geoffrey of Monmouth, which is really not history at all these days, but and it's kind of written like that, at least tended to be. And then like like almost right after that, actually, you have like the first romance is often considered to be Brut by Wace, and it's an Arthurian romance, right? And because it's literally just Geoffrey of Monmouth's story with some other stuff. He has like the Round Table and whatnot, but and he doesn't write it as a history; he writes it as a poem. And romance, I don't know if you know Old French here too, but the Old French word for French is romance. Old Occitan word for Occitan is romance. It literally just means we're speaking the common tongue, the Roman tongue. They would say we spoke Latin. It's not freaking Latin, but they thought it was. I mean, it was at one point.
Well,
but it wasn't.
I mean, they are all called Romance languages now, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Right, and so this is just a story in the common tongue, pretty much, is really all it means, because they wouldn't have called it French, right? They would have called it the Roman language, right? And yeah,
romance as a genre is not what it used to be. Romance nowadays is a love story that's usually not an actual love story. Romance as it used to be is like an adventure, basically.
Yeah, well, you have a
pretty simple.
There's almost adventure. There's often chivalry involved because it's medieval. And then there is what we would normally call romantic elements.
Often, yep.
But that's just because, you know, that's cool. I mean, like I like romance. I don't like romance. I like romance. No, I'm actually a capital R romance.
I understand.
But and which is actually appropriate why like it would get Arthuriana would get revived in the Romantic era. I don't know if I'm a humanities major, capital R romanticism or whatever. Coolest period. Sucks that modernism followed it shortly after. Utterly terrible. Postmodernism even worse. Anyways, so I know romanticism has its problems, guys, but it's way cooler, let me tell you. Way better poetry. Not even close. So anyways, and the art, holy crap. I was showing to you those thumbnails earlier, but and that's all romantic art. So I mean, like, anyways, sorry, Pollock. Not sorry. Anyways, but or anyone.
How many different things have we bashed
any
at this
modernist
point?
or postmodernist art I will freely bash. I studied it. I know what I'm talking about, guys. No, and it's garbage. Anyways, I'll stop now. I should just make a video just hating on modernists and postmodernists art. It's funny when Dada did it, guys, but he was making fun of you. You weren't supposed to take him seriously. Okay. Anyways, but it is interesting though that when you move into the like modernist period and postmodernist period, that's when you get the historical King Arthur. It takes away the enchantment, right? Which is lame. Anyways, which is why I like Merlin. Okay, I will say this about Merlin. Merlin takes away the Christian aspects. It tries really hard
it does
not
quite
to show
a bit,
it at all, right? Like that, especially when Arthur is what is it? He's going on his quest, right? So he sits there in the chapel all night. What's he doing? He's praying, obviously, but they literally never say the word pray. Right? He's literally just sitting there, and I'm like, what? You know, so like,
well, that and their take on the Holy Grail is not. It's not even the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
It's I forget what they call it, the cup of healing or something like that, cup of life, maybe. I don't remember. But
there's a cauldron from Celtic myth that gives life, but yeah, in Merlin it doesn't really appear as Merlin is very a loose adaptation, but I still think
it is.
The fantasy elements work really well, I think.
Yes.
I mean, there's definitely
It's
some
just a
plot
really
holes,
well
blah, blah,
told
blah.
story, even with its problems. It's just so much fun to watch.
Oh, it is very fun, very enjoyable. Don't mind the first episode; it's like the worst one. But
It is, but even that is not a horrible episode.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So I watched Merlin when I first watched when I was like 20. Okay, I'm 27 now. Okay, just actually when this video comes out, I'll be 28. But anyways, that is not that relevant. Anyways, I watched it when I was 20, so I wasn't actually watching it when it was coming out at all. Like the show was done when I first watched it, and I had a friend tell me about it, so I go and watch the first episode, and I was like, wow, that was okay. And I don't watch any more for months, and then I'm just sitting there one day. I'm like, I should. I'm feeling something, right? Let's watch more of this. I watched the second episode. I was like, wow, that was great. And then I binge watched the whole show.
Yep.
Okay, like I'm now on my sixth viewing of Merlin as a TV show. I love watching it. I love watching it with my kids. They like it, and it's appropriate for my kids. It's just good. Just good.
The first episode of Merlin I watched was the Mort d'Arthur. It's the one where with the questing beast. And so it's like the season finale of season 2 or something like that.
Yes.
And me and my brother were sick, so we stayed home from church and we watched that. Oh. we did something else as well, but we watched that and it was like, this is amazing. I love this. And then we went back and watched it, and I watched it with my other brother. I don't know. By the time we started watching it, it had finished airing as well. So I didn't watch it as it was coming out, but all of the people around me were watching it. I had in 4-H, there's a whole bunch of people that were watching it as it aired and would talk about it. I was like, no, I got it. I can't listen to the spoilers because I heard the spoiler of the last episode very early on before I even started watching the show type thing. It's just like, but no, it's just so good, and it very much does its own take on the Arthurian myth and each of the elements, but it does it in a way that feels respectful to the myth at the same time, which is my biggest problem that I had with Once a Future King, is it didn't feel respectful to the Arthurian myth. And for as popular and as well loved as that book is, I don't understand why I feel like it didn't do that. I don't know. It's just interesting. Like I would tell you to read it because it's influential in Arthurian literature. And if you like it, that's wonderful. But it like, because of the influence that it's had on Arthurian literature, it's an important book to read. Even if you don't end up enjoying it like I did. So I don't know,
man.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I can read it. That modern is trash. Anyways, no.
But Merlin's great. So
I say that I actually do like some aspects of modernism, postmodernism, but not much. But anyway, Merlin is great. The biggest thing about Merlin, if no one's watched it, I guess, is that Merlin is the same age as Arthur, pretty much. Right? He's not the old advisor, right? And he's not openly a sorcerer because it's not allowed, right? So magic is outlawed.
The Great.
Oh my gosh.
It's got good comedic moments in it as well.
It does, yeah.
It handles the mix of drama and comedy very well.
There are a couple episodes I like skip now, having watched the show, like the troll and the goblin episodes.
The goblin one is still kind of fun, but the troll one is definitely
the troll one is 2 episodes. How dare they?
I know.
It's terrible. The goblin one is better. You're right, but the troll one, no, I gotta say that. So besides that, it's a really good show, and you're right. It has this comedic moments that really work well. It's got this like brotherly sense, even though Merlin is a servant, right? And so he's like not taking it seriously, right? Like, who trusts the word of a servant, type of thing. So it definitely has charm. I really like Merlin, and I read one of the books. I don't know if you remember that. They have novelizations of the episodes for like the first 3 seasons, I think. I've read the first episode's novelization, and it was pretty much like the first episode.
Yep. I found that to be the case with most novelizations. They're not a whole lot different usually.
Yeah, they're really not worth it normally. You'll have like you have extras normally in a
Mhm.
novelization, which can be
Yeah.
nice. Like Halo: The Flood, for example, is a novelization of the first Halo game. Kind of, it actually all the chapters take place in between like the levels, right? So that's nice, but you still know where it's going, right? So you get extra stuff. It's also
Yeah.
insanely boring, though. It's the worst Halo novel, right? And so I mean, like, or even or like I haven't read this one actually, but I know that the Willow novelization for the movie Willow, it has like the
Mhm.
deleted scenes in it, right? So
Gotcha.
what
Right.
didn't make it into the movie they filmed, but they didn't make it into the movie for whatever reason. That stuff actually is retained in the
Yeah.
book, which is cool, right? But so you get that, but besides that, they're not really worth it so much.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, I mean, unless you really like boring books. Wheel of Time
Well,
fans, take notes. Anyways,
no, because the books are not a novelization of the show because the show isn't even an adaptation of the novels.
oh my gosh, that show was terrible. Talking about we're hating
It
on the
was so
books, but
I
oh my gosh.
I I found out that season 3 was airing and I'm like, I don't care. I don't think I'm gonna watch
Yeah.
it.
I didn't
And that's
watch season
not a
2.
good. I did, and it was better than season 1,
Yeah.
but I just have no interest in the show at
Yeah.
all.
You know, I
And
have good memories of season 1, but literally just this. Okay, I lived in an apartment for like 6 months before I moved from Colorado. Actually, where I started my channel is in this apartment. And in the same complex, there was like businesses, kind of weird. There's like 4 buildings, but they're like in a square and there's like a courtyard in the middle. So like one building was apartments, the other one was like a laundromat, and like it used to be a post office,
Mhm.
but pretty much nothing else. And then another one had some restaurants, and there was a pizza place. And I remember getting like a calzone to watch like the first episode of Wheel of Time and stuff. I'm sitting down with my wife, right? So that's a good memory, you know what I mean? But the show
Right.
sucks. So I mean, like,
Well, I remember I don't remember what movie we went to watch, but we went and watched some movie in theaters, and they show previews beforehand, and they showed the trailer for Wheel of Time, and I was like, "This looks really good. It looks like an accurate adaptation of the show." I
mhm,
was already pretty suspicious that it wouldn't be, but I was like, "This trailer, if it's like this trailer, then it's going to be good." And then you go and watch the show, and you're like, "This is nothing at all like the book." And
yeah,
the changes that they made were unnecessary, and the changes that they should have made, they didn't. Because like those
yeah,
books could be improved upon drastically
oh, for sure,
with an adaptation.
yeah,
I think the first book, like I could come up with a treatment for the first book in maybe 10 episodes, and they gave it
mhm,
8. I'm like, you need more time than that. And it just, I don't know, just like everything about it is not okay. The casting is okay for a
yeah,
lot of the characters, but not
yeah.
all of them.
Casting was fine.
For some of them,
They
Rand
they
Rand's good.
Rand's
They got
not
a
the main
redhead.
character.
He's not. He should be.
That's a big
That's
problem.
the big
I feel
problem.
like they
It is.
made the girls the main characters, which is crazy
Mhm.
because that book series has so many women that are already almost main characters anyways, besides the
Right.
fact that Rand is the main character. But
Right.
and so it's just unnecessary and still it just didn't
Yeah.
work either. I mean, like what the hell?
Right.
Rand's like okay, whatever. So
Yeah.
like the
They
prophecy
tried
is
to
all
make him
about
Mr.
all of
Habit.
them type
Right.
of thing. Yeah, didn't work at all.
And
Um,
yeah, just they created more plot holes
yeah.
by what they did.
It's all silly. Like I'm not a big fan of the chosen one like trope anyways, but like
I like it when
the
it's
book
done well.
yeah, the books kind of only work with that. It's like
Yeah.
the whole point.
Mhm.
Which tends to be the
Right.
case when you have a chosen one trope in there. So I mean like
So I don't
oh
know.
gosh.
It's unfortunate because it really could have been an amazing adaptation had they adapted it correctly and
Yeah.
improved on the things that the books needed to improve upon. Cut out some of the things because there's a lot that they could absolutely cut out while maintaining the ideas that are being presented in the books, and it just they didn't
Yeah.
they didn't do a good job of it.
Yeah.
And now they're trying to. It sounds like they're trying to kind of course correct, but you're 2 seasons in at this
Yeah,
point.
when you
Everybody who was giving it a chance is done giving it a
yeah,
chance.
when a show does
So
that, it's always just a mistake. Oh, though rather they made a mistake in the first place. So that's like Halo, as far as I'm aware. Like I heard the second season is better than the first, but Like Halo fans are not going to watch past the first season, so
right.
and
You already. I mean, it's even Rings of Power is that same way. Like
yeah,
season 2 was better, not great, but it was better. There were
it's
some good
very
things about
forgettable.
it. It just you've already lost all of the people that you need to watch the show are the fans because those are the people who are going to
Yeah.
drive discussion.
Who did they test these things on? Because I mean, if they showed that to me, I'd be like, yeah, this is garbage. Redo the whole thing, right? Like, I mean,
Right. I mean, there like even with the first season, you could take a lot of aspects of that first season and make something interesting, make something really good. I love the idea of telling the story of the creation of the Rings of Power. That's a great story to set
yeah,
in the Second Age because you can incorporate the fallen Numenor. You can incorporate so many of these things that they're trying to incorporate. But you have to make the elves the main characters and make the humans be single season characters. And then
yeah,
in between each season, do a time jump, kill off the characters or make them significantly older, and then
yeah,
bring in the new younger characters, whatever things like that. And you could do it, and you could even with you may still have to do some time compression, but you could still do it in a far more faithful and accurate way, and make a
yeah.
much better show.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I actually took a class on adaptations. I didn't want to take, but I did take it. And it was my last semester. I had to take a certain class, and that was the only one that fit the bill. So I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah, I understand.
And so that's like my one film credit. I am in a short movie. I don't know if you saw it,
Yes,
but
I remember.
it was for that class.
Mhm.
And so we read a lot of books, and then we'd watch adaptations, pretty much. And we learned that there were pretty much the book I had to read for class divided adaptations into 3 categories, and I don't even remember what they are. There's like like the more like almost exactly like faithful traditional or adaptation.
Mhm.
There's the ones that change some things, and then there's the very like out there. Like, I don't remember
Right.
what the hell the terms are, right? And they work. I mean, right? They can work however the hell you want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like The Secret Life of
You can,
Walter Mitty, whatever. Really not similar to the short story at all. If you read the short story, it's really not. Right? Okay. Like, but the movie's great. I like that
mhm.
movie, and so like the real time doesn't have to be accurate to the book so much, but it should still
No.
be good. And the show's not
Right.
good. So I mean,
Yes.
like,
Well, the example I like to use because I'm part of the fantasy community and the reading community and all that stuff is How to Train Your Dragon. Those movies are drastically different from the books, but they're excellent films, like just all around fantastic films. And they're nothing at all like the books, but nobody cares because you're still telling a good story.
yeah,
It would be a little bit more, it is a little bit more imperative that you be accurate when you're talking about Tolkien. Um, but you can still
I
get
would
away
say,
with a lot if as long as you tell a good story. And neither Wheel of Time nor Rings of Power have done that. And I don't
yeah,
know, like
but
you could
which is a
include Tom
shame they had.
Bombadil in
Uh,
season and two, like there,
no,
you could, and even their adaptation of him wasn't horrible. Okay,
no,
their adaptation of him fit the show really well. Um, Not how I would have adapted him, but nevertheless, he fit the show. And you could include a Tom Bombadil in a Second Age show, and it would make sense. You could make it make sense. I just they none of it feels like Tolkien. There's very very little that feels Tolkienian, and just yeah.
okay. This is gonna be
Anyways, we're off topic
no,
now.
this is gonna bring us back to Arthuriana a little bit, but
All right.
this is one thing. Okay, that like I can understand faking things. Actually, I think
Mhm.
authors should fake some things, and so probably the same in adaptations. That something should be faked, right? Depending on like,
Yeah.
okay, what I'm trying to say, and I don't want to, because I don't want to ostracize anyone. I don't want to say Christianity is the best, but Tolkien definitely had some things in mind, right,
Right.
when he was writing his stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
and you can tell if you know what to look for, right?
Hmm.
And you can tell the people adapting this stuff don't. Okay, even Peter Jackson doesn't to a degree. He has more of an idea,
Yeah.
right? But he's missing a lot, right?
Yeah.
Which is why the book is 10 times better. I don't care what Peter Jackson
Hmm.
fanboys think. I like the movies, but they are nowhere
Yeah.
near the books.
You
And
can have masterpiece films that just aren't nearly as good as the books. Still.
yeah, right? And Lord of the Rings is immaculate. I mentioned today I was reading it just for something for another channel's video even, and I almost stinking cried reading paragraphs out of context. You know, like I hadn't even read like the whole chapter or even the whole book or whatever at that point. I was just like, this is so good. You know, I'm like, holy crap, right? But I could tell why it was so good in some sense, because I was pulling it out actually for a video on the Annunciation, right? And this comes off as very religious when I'm reading it in this context, you know what I mean? Like, and well, it doesn't in a lot of contexts. Like, you don't have to read it and feel like, oh man, this guy's preaching to me or whatever. You don't feel like that at all when you read the Lord of the Rings, right? But it's definitely there. You know what I mean? It's not as overt as something like C.S. Lewis, right? But it's there, right? And in fact, if you take it away, the book doesn't exist, right? So I mean, like, and so when I was thinking about this when I read Cornwell, is that he needed to fake it. And he didn't. Okay, he needed to fake, right? He has this huge disdain for Christianity, and it makes the books not that good. Even though he's a great author, I could tell he's a great author. Like, the books are really okay, right? Like, and because he just didn't fake it. He's missing. Arthuriana is just inherently Christian. I mean, I hate to say it in some sense, but it just is. You know what I mean? Like, and some people don't like that, right? And I don't. I mean, if I'm going to read something, I mean, like, it should probably be what it is. You know what I mean? Like, and I know there's a lot of people that aren't Christians these days, and that's fine. I literally don't have any problem with that. But like reading Arthuriana, it makes a lot more sense if it's Christian. It literally makes no sense almost if it's not, right? I mean, like the Grail Quest literally doesn't exist if it's not. And in fact, when I finished the Warlord Chronicles, I was like, you know what? If this was the true story of Arthur, there would be no Arthurian legend. It literally would not happen. This is garbage, pretty much. Like, this is not worth talking about. I mean, like, and that means in my mind, Cornwell failed, and he failed hard in that sense. Even though the books have good moments, right? Even though the book is really well written in a lot of ways, it's not worth it. He failed. Okay, like seriously, like if that was the actual truth, if this was the history that Arthuriana is all based off of, Arthuriana would not exist. I can tell you right now. Okay, like so.
Yeah. And I mean, that's you can say that same thing about anything, anything that has lasted. Tolkien, for example, he is who he is because of his influences and whatever, and that tied directly into his writings, into his books, and because of that, you get Shannara Chronicles. You get all these other things that are you get Wheel of Time. You get Harry Potter, even. All these things have come because of who Tolkien was and the books that he wrote. And that's, I mean, it's the exact same concept where you are what you are, and if you try and remove that piece of it, it's not gonna work out. So
yeah, they're all pitiful shadows. Literally, none of them capture Tolkien at all. The only book I've ever felt like some good emotion when reading, and it's not even like strictly based off Tolkien much, was an indie book I read recently. This is like a month ago, and I was like, wow, this book is good. You know what I mean? Like, and this guy gets it more than any of these other people I've ever read, adapting something like that for fantasy. But which I guess I could plug that book. Where the hell is it? I thought I had it right here, but I guess I don't. Maybe. Yes, Tiny. Where are you, book? Okay, whatever. The Boy Became a Jackrabbit. That's the name of the book. Oh, there it is. Really good. So short.
Yeah, I want to read it. Even if it's not about a boy becoming a jackrabbit, I still want to read it.
Disappointing. Anyways, but and so like I don't feel like I don't feel like I have to agree with someone to find some depth. I think if the depth is not there, it's just not there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, and whether I don't care, you know, the person, I'm not saying at all that this person has to be Christian for that depth to be there, right? Like, I've read some great stinking books that are not written by Christians or whatever, right? And that's not what I'm saying at all, but I'm just saying I think depth of character, interesting, like, people I also find write better books themselves. So and less interesting people don't. But
well, I probably shouldn't write books then.
Oh no, you're interesting too. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting how that plays out, I think, in a way. But I don't know. I'm interested to see what Arthuriana I read, in a sense, like which ones will go more historical. Like, because another one I kind of want to read
Mhm.
is what's his name? Christian? Last
Oh,
name?
Giles Christian?
Giles
I
Christian.
Yeah,
He goes for the heavily historical approach again as well, though, and I feel like
yeah,
I'm not really in the mood for that right now.
right.
Um, so, but I
Yeah.
don't
Read a
know of
couple
like
more
any.
fantastical ones first.
Yeah, I don't know any other like because I am reading the Crystal Cave, which is kind of fantastic.
Mhm.
It's actually really like
Right.
I don't know, maybe in the later books it gets more fantasy-esque, but in the first book it's kind of passed off as kind of like flukes, the
Mhm.
magical aspects. So, um, but
Well,
yeah,
I I don't know. I'm not sure where the Crystal Cave myth came from. If that was from uh Stewart, is that her name? Mary Stewart?
I
Is
believe
that
so.
the
Yes.
author?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's her that came up with the Crystal Cave myth or aspect of the myth, or somebody
Hmm.
else, or if whatever it was. But I remember, because there is the Crystal Cave is included in Merlin, and
Yeah.
that's part of that storyline. And I remember seeing behind the scenes stuff where Colin Morgan is talking about, I loved filming these episodes because they're such an integral part of the myth. And so I don't know where that myth came from, if he's just referring back to the
Yeah. I
Mary
don't
Stewart
know.
books or whatever. But I since hearing that, I was like, okay, I need to go find this Crystal Cave, and find out what it is. And so when I heard about the Stewart ones, I wanted to go back and read them. So I will eventually,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah. I'm not sure honestly about the Crystal Cave thing.
Because like I haven't noticed it in anything, in any of the other series that I've read or books that I've read. Even like you'd think maybe Lamort has it, especially since
Yeah.
Lamort, Merlin gets trapped in a cave by Nimue. She puts a rock on him on the cave and seals it shut, and he can't ever get out.
Yeah.
And that's how he dies. That's how he leaves the story. Um, and so I was like, well, maybe that's the Crystal Cave. Maybe that is incorporated in some other stories or something like that. Who knows?
Hmm.
But I don't know. I've wanted to go back to it and find out that the origins of that myth specifically, because it's interesting
Yeah.
with the actor's response to that storyline. So
Yeah. It is interesting, and I'm curious. But and those it is interesting actually seeing a lot of those like the origin of this stuff,
Mhm.
right? Because
Right.
none of it is like because you have like the Celtic myths, right? That we talked about already, right? But I mean, like the Round Table, like I said, was created by Wace, and um,
Mhm.
like Arthur's not mentioned by like Gildas, for example, but he is mentioned by Nennius, right? And then he's like obviously the main focus of Monmouth stuff, and and then you get other stuff or whatever, right? Like it's funny actually. There, Arthur has a sword, a dagger, and a spear actually that all have names, but
Yep.
you only ever
And,
see Excalibur really. So
well, he also has two Excaliburs because the first
well, yeah,
Excalibur that he pulls from the stone gets, where does that get destroyed? It gets destroyed pretty early on, and then he goes to the lake and gets one from the Lady of the Lake that is also
yeah,
Excalibur with a sheath that you what's the I think you won't. It's something like you won't bleed out if you are wearing that sheath or something like that. Is the
yeah,
enchantment something
yeah,
like that? I don't remember exactly, but like the sheath is more powerful, more important than the sword,
yeah,
basically, in that story. And then he loses the sheath, and that's a whole mess of things. Um,
yeah.
but basically, he has two Excaliburs, and they're both called Excalibur because Mallory didn't use any form of consistency or anything in his books. You have characters that die earlier in the series and are just wandering around. They get sent out at the Grail
Yeah,
quest or whatever, and for him, it's because he just took all these different myths and compiled them
yeah,
and into kind of a canon, I guess, of for the myth. And from there, it just when you're pulling from all these different stories, you'll come across these characters that are important in this story, and you're like, well, they died earlier, but they're important to this story, so I'm just going to leave them in this story, and we'll just mention that they exist, type thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get away with it, and sometimes when you read it critically, you notice the mistakes and stuff like that. But if you're just reading it for the story, which is generally how I read stories, is I read them for the story, for what they are, and because of that, I'm able to just enjoy the story, even when there are things like that. And where did I catch one? I caught one at some point. Oh, I caught it in Wheel of Time. Tam is in multiple places at once in one of those books, and I'm just like, oh, I guess he's here now, because I don't know. But anyways, it's no need to get back to Wheel of Time again.
It's been about half our discussion. No, yes. Yeah, I think it's I have goals when I read Arthuriana. Maybe we could talk about this now. Because I haven't read Wace's Brute. Actually, I haven't read Monmouth. So I want to read Monmouth, I want to read Wace, and then I want to read Lachaman's Brute, which will be a challenge. I don't think Lachaman's Brute is translated in its entirety. It's not completely about Arthur. It's a history. Do you know who Brutus is?
I like the Et tu Brutus. That Brutus,
no, not
or
that one.
Yes.
Deep cut Brutus here. Anyway, Brutus of Troy.
Okay.
He is a guy who came from Troy, just like Aeneas went to Rome or whatever. And he founded London in Britain. Is named after him. Right? It's fantasy. It's not real. Sense. But this was a pretty popular medieval motif, was Brutus. So that's what the Brute is called, right? Wace is Brute, right? It's about Brutus, or at least it kind of begins there in a sense. And same with Lachaman's. Lachaman's is written in a really early middle English dialect, which is why I want to read it, because it just seems difficult. But and so it seems like a fun challenge. But it's gonna take a while. He mentions Roan, actually, though, the spear or whatever the hell, it's got a huge name. But it's gonna but Roan for short. But as far as I have a couple of thoughts here actually recently, but what do you think are some of the future reads you want to go to for Arthuriana?
Well, let's see.
You have a list?
I don't have a specific list. I just have a generic TBR that I have written down, but I do have them all marked out, I think. Where is my? There it is. Crystal Cave, that's one that I want to read for sure. Monmouth, I want to read History of the Kings of Britain. I want to read Chrétien de Troyes, because I haven't read that one, even though I've had it for several years now. Percival, I want to go through a couple of Percival tales. What else? Do I have anything? Oh, I have a I don't know, some book that's focused on Mordred that I want to read. What else? Let's see if I can find some. I'm interested to try the Giles Christian ones. I'm not sure that I'm going to like them, but I'm interested to see what I think. Mary Stuart, the Merlin trilogy.
Yeah.
Arthurian Age, Sean Pogue one. Jane Wolfe, Castleview, that's one that I want to read. And then David Drake, the Dragon Lord. I don't know. I'm just basically reading the ones that have little crowns beside them to tell me that they're Arthuriana that I have written on. But and other than that, Fall of Arthur, Tolkien's Fall of Arthur. That's a big one that I want to read, obviously.
Oh, you haven't read that one?
I haven't.
Wow.
So I've got plenty for me to continue reading. I know there's some more big ones that I'm forgetting. But for now, that's some names.
Yeah, there's some good ones. Yeah, I haven't actually read any of Detroit's romances besides Percival. so I need to read his other ones. And I'd like to read more of the Marie de France, her lays. I've read a little bit, but not all of them.
Oh, I do want to read Tennyson.
Yeah, right. You got to read Idylls.
That's the other one.
So, definitely. I feel like there's probably more out there that I'll figure out later, but I think you should read. I think you should read Sordid Sunset. I don't know. I haven't read it in ages, but
I should. Still, well, I suspect that I'll enjoy it to some degree.
He has a dog.
Very little that I haven't. He does have a dog. That's actually a part of the myth as well. I forget what it's named, but Huon from Children of or from Baron and Luthien is a reference to Arthur's dog in some ways.
Yeah, it seems like Cabal or something. I don't remember actually. It's been a long time. But he doesn't show up in a lot of stuff. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Right, that's another one I need to read.
One. There's a lot we are realizing, I'm sure. Let's see. I kind of one that is kind of Arthurian in the sense that Fantastes is Jurgen or Jurgen, how I'm going to say. Except for Jurgen is way more irreverent. Gosh, the best scene in Jurgen is when there's a giant dung beetle that's a judge. There's some good recent ones, like I say good, they're probably not to everyone's taste. Spear is very short. It is like a queer Percival take, kind of. I think it works pretty well. And then you have By Force Alone by Lavi Tidar, which is super irreverent.
No audiobook, so I'm not.
Oh, okay. I don't know. That'll be a while, probably. Maybe. I don't know.
I should just get the ebook and read it on my lunch break.
It is like super irreverent, but that's what's like it's aiming for, like pretty much. Like it is pretty vulgar at parts, but it always does it in like a weird like comic way. Almost like just heads up, it's like it's pretty crude, but it's like funny at times. Like I remember after reading it, I was just like, I just said everything by Force Alone like afterwards, because it's just like a catchphrase that just pops up a lot in the book, and it's just silly. Tidar is a great. That's actually probably my least favorite thing I've read by Tidar. He's a great author. There's also what's that one that came out recently? The Bright Sword, I think. Yeah, by Grossman. So I kind of want to read that one.
The same guy who did Magicians.
Yeah, right. So it's probably more like postmodern, kind of like By Force Alone is, and stuff like that. But I haven't read Magicians. I'm not interested. But
what's the one? Legendborn, maybe. I have no desire to read that one.
I have no desire to read that one either. Most of my stuff just doesn't pique my interest at all. The Mythical Wood stuff actually kind of touches on Arthuriana stuff a little bit. Like I read Lavendis a few months ago, and the Lavin is like Avalon type of thing, right? Except for Avalon's obviously just apples, and Lavin misses that. But anyways,
there is another Avalon heavy series or book or something that maybe it's just Mist of Avalon that I'm thinking of, but I think there's another one that I keep hearing about and I keep meaning to write down and I always forget to, or something like that. But I don't know. I want to read. I like more of that stuff. That's fine. It's good too.
Yeah. No, there's some good stuff. But another one that kind of touches on Arthurian stuff, but it's really not Arthurian, is The Dark World by Henry Kuttner. And then just there's more. I do want to read more though. There's a good amount of stuff to read. I'm focused a lot on, besides the series I'm reading now, a lot of the romances I want to read. I really like medieval works. That isn't obvious. It's nice reading. Arthur covers both, right? It's two birds with one stone in some sense. I can read the Arthurian stuff, but I'm also reading the medieval work or whatever, which is fun for me in a lot of ways and rewarding. And so I like that. I like that. Yes. So, but I will definitely be reading, like I said, Tristram. I want to read Parzival's Saga, which is an Old Norse version of Percival, and I want to translate it. I'm thinking about translating it because
do it.
I found one translation into English, and I'm just like, it's kind of expensive if I'm remembering correctly. I was like, because it's like straight up just a scholarly text. Like a lot of these works, medieval texts only really survive in like scholarly like areas, right? You know, like Waltarius, right? Like no one is reading Waltarius unless you're a medieval scholar, right? Like, and so, which is a shame. People should be reading that stuff, but like, so Parzival's Saga seems like it's kind of similar. So I was like, I have not ever translated anything from Old Norse, but like part of me is like, I like learning languages that way. I prefer to get immersed.
You should do it because then you can sell it and make money off of it.
True.
Seems like a good reason.
I think I will, do it anyways, honestly, so. But it takes time. That's a lot of freaking work. I was I am with my next lecture I'm recording for this other channel. What the same thing I was looking at Lord of the Rings for. I was looking at the old Saxon Heliond, right? And I was just like, I was so zoned in on that. Like I don't know if you've ever translated in that sense where you're just like focusing on each word and you're just like, okay, how, you know what I mean? Like, how does this work into the sentence? And like, it just is so consuming. It feels very satisfying at the end, but it's just like very while it's happening. So
yeah, I haven't done basically any translation since any significant translation since I was in college. And when did I graduate? 4 years ago, something like that, 3 years ago. And so basically I haven't done anything since I actually learned how to speak Spanish. And so I haven't had that type of experience just because I haven't done anything. But I need to. It's a great skill to have for language speaker, for a foreign speaker. So it's one that I need to get into because I can do quick and dirty translations, but it's not. It's not the same. So
the way I handle translation though is definitely from a philological approach, which is almost always a slow approach. It's almost always with dead languages, anyways. Right. It's a very different approach from like a linguistics approach, for example, which is more useful in some sense for like modern languages, of course. So, but it's fun. It's fun. I love translating. So that's why I like reading this Arthurian stuff in Middle English. I'd like to read them in like Old French and Middle High German or whatever, but we shall get there someday, probably, hopefully. It's gonna be a while, I think. So, but yeah, there are some good Arthurian stuff. Hopefully there's some good Arthurian stuff coming out. And I want to know about it.
Yeah. I'm sure there is. I would have no doubt that there is. We just have to find it. It's probably self-published stuff. Yeah. That it's just sliding under the radar because it's too small for people to see. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. I mean, Wars of Wrath, that's a fun series, but we've only got 2 books and haven't heard anything about the third one in a long time. Nothing like hugely amazing or anything, but it's fun and it's Arthurian and
I like it because it actually I like how it the Wars of Wrath includes like the other stuff from that time period that often is excluded, right?
It
like
doesn't
the whole
just focus
stuff.
on it doesn't
just
focus.
That's another topic actually. It hasn't come up at all somehow. So speaking of translation, my love language is Old English. It's not an actual love language. No, so but I like looking at Old English stuff, and the Old English people who spoke Old English are the Saxons, or it's the Angles and the Saxons, Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, maybe some Frisians and some other people starting there like yachts or whatever. But it's interesting reading that stuff where they're obviously the good guys in some sense. They're the people writing it at least. And then you read Arthurian stuff, and Saxons are like almost very often just like evil. Like, and it's just like I like it when they get a bit more nuanced, but they're almost always the bad guys in some sense, at least, even if they have this nuance. So it's very interesting, right? Because like like the reason I like Old English is because I speak English. Right? Like when I was younger, I was much more on the side of the Arthurian, like Celtic stuff. I thought it was cool. But then when I looked at like Celtic languages like Irish or Welsh, I was like, I don't know. I like it's all Greek to me, right? Like I can kind of get some of it, but like it really doesn't feel natural. And I'm not saying that in some like race purity sense by any means, you know what I mean? But like I just mean like Old English looks familiar because it's English. So I mean like and it helps my English because I speak English, you know what I mean? Like and so it's just interesting going that shift. Very different. They're the opposite ends, right? Like it's interesting though, because I mean like in reality, like in like Arthurian stuff, the Saxons are pagan, right? They're not Christian. So we actually have no sources in Old English that old, right? I mean, because people don't really write until they get converted, pretty much, at least in the West. And so, weirdly enough, but and so like you don't have any like pagan Anglo-Saxon sources. There are none, right? I mean, like you have hints and you have bits and pieces, right? But like there's no pagan writing in a sense. And then you read, and then you look at the one of the like rallying themes of these Britons is that they were Christian, but it was also what actually kind of helped them integrate in some ways with these Anglo-Saxons is that while there was a mission from the south, from Rome and whatnot, a lot of the initial missionary work for the Anglo-Saxons are all from Celtic speaking peoples, right? And so I mean like so I mean, like when you like the area of Hwicha is like established, for example, it's Christian actually from the start, and that's probably because the Britons, that the Saxons had taken it from, right? Very, I don't know, different. When you read Arthuriana, the Saxons are always just like pagan barbarian dogs, pretty much.
Right, and I mean that's kind of. And on one hand, it's kind of for the narrative structure so that they can have a clear villain, clear antagonist. And so they just, well, these guys aren't Britons, so we might as well use them as the bad guys, which may not be the right perspective to have, but it functions for what they needed it to function for, and that's really what why they do it that way. So
yeah, it's interesting how like that shift happens, right? Because in like the Celtic languages, English are called Saxons, right? And in English, they're called English, obviously. So like, I guess I need to tell you that one. There might be reasons for that. I mean, like for example, there's a story. I think it's from Gregory the Great, who he sees some slaves, right? And he's like, "Oh, what are these slaves from, or whatever? They're from." Actually, I don't know exactly how the story went. I'm butchering it, but they're like, "Who are these slaves or whatever?" And they're like, "Oh, they're the Angli." And he's like, "That sounds a lot like angels. They're so beautiful, type of thing, right?" And so like, Angli would have been really similar to the Latin word for angels, but and so I mean like, and so maybe there's some positive connotations there. The English call themselves English rather than Saxons, but there's no people that call themselves English over in Germany or Denmark. There is the Angeln actually, which is where the Angles would have came from. The Angles actually lived in present day Denmark. So did the Jutes, Jutland, right? So I mean, like the Danes are from Sweden, but anyways, and the islands. They're from the islands there too that are still part of Denmark. But I mean, like Scania, those like the homeland in some sense. But the Jutes don't survive, and neither do the Angles over there. But Lower Saxony still exists. That's where the Saxons came from. So I mean, we're Old Saxon spoken ancestor of Low German. And so it's just like, anyways, I get distracted. It is interesting reading the differences in a sense, right? And it's interesting reading the influence too, because English actually is notoriously very little influenced by the Celtic languages. Now, the Roman area of Britain would have had a big population drop after the Roman withdrawal, which Law had actually kind of incorporates with the plague,
right?
In Grail, and was it there in Pendragon? Yeah, I don't know. It's in Grail at least. and so he kind of incorporates that. And it is definitely prestige, though. The incoming, it's almost certainly some sort of assimilation, right? But the prestige culture seems to be the Saxon, English region, whatever, the Germanic culture coming in, and it's because they start speaking English, even though almost certainly there's Britons still there. In fact, one of I think the third king on record for Sussex, Isla is the first one. You see him in Arthurian stuff a lot. But his name is Athel Walch, which means a noble Walch, which is what we get the word Welsh. Okay, and it's often a term used just for slaves too, because they enslaved them. Slavery is very common back then, obviously. And so there's actually a good chance that guy was a Briton. Like, it was noticeably not someone that would be considered Germanic or whatever, right? Because that's a weird name. Why the hell would you be named that if you were like a Briton? He's probably not his real name. He's probably Briton, right? So I mean, like, and he was somehow king of the South Saxons. So, obviously not like an inherent like, oh, everyone's evil and they're going to exterminate, genocide all the Britons or whatever. There's a big population decrease in that area. So I mean, like, Christianity fails in the East, but it stays in the West, right? Also where the Welsh stayed, or the Britons, and later become the Welsh and other peoples. But so anyways, it is interesting to see that stuff. There are some things like you can use that actually in like the historical approaches, like Sean Pogue does. But I disagree with him a little bit. Like in the Strife of Camland, for example, he mentions the Saxon shore, right? And he says, oh, the Romans put Saxons here to man the shore, I guess. I was like, yeah, that's not true. There's no way. I know it's disputed, you know what I mean, technically, but like, well, that doesn't make sense to me, as if I put on my scholar's cap. All right, like the archaeology doesn't support that actually. So I mean, like, archaeology supports a Saxon presence in the 5th century, which is when the invasion started. So, and the forts are from the 3rd century, so that doesn't seem to add up. So I mean, like, the Saxon shore almost certainly seems to be there to protect against Saxons and was not manned by Saxons. So,
yes,
I have nitpick stuff like this all the time in my reviews for these books that are yet to come out. Of course, I'm just like, well, actually, like, or whatever. I'm just like try to control myself. But like,
just go off on it. It's fine.
Yeah, there was. Yeah, the one I thought the Vandals appearing in Pendragon was really weird. Personally,
that felt weird. Because like the people that they used, the group that they used and called Vandals, that Law had used, not they. It's only one person. Like, from what I understand, they're like not actual Vandals or something like that, or like they don't know who they were or something. I don't know. I was reading something about it and I don't remember what it was now,
it's weird. They're weirdly described, right? Because they're described pretty much in an Orientalist fashion, which is a little alarming anyways, but also doesn't make any sense. So I mean, like, okay, well, the Vandalic kingdom only existed in Africa for about 100 years. Okay, that's not even very long. But if you look at the Vandalic kingdom, they would have had a ton of languages spoken there, and it was just the people in charge of the Vandals that would have spoken Vandalic. But if they're Vandals, then they're almost certainly speaking Vandalic if they get exiled. It's the same thing actually in Wars of Wrath, right? Gelimer was the last king, and then so he makes up some guy, and Lawhead does, I don't remember his name, and their fleet flees, from the Greeks. They're exiled or kicked out of Carthage or whatever, and they end up in Ireland of all places, right? And they're described as swarthy. Like, there's literally no connection that their languages would sound similar to Saxon, even though it would, right? You know what I mean? So like, because they're Germanic speaking people, just like the Saxons, right? And so I mean, it's just like odd. Oh yeah, another gripe I had about the Lawhead books. This is more of a pedantic gripe again. It really doesn't matter at all, because Lawhead is he cleans up the legend in some sense. Remember the Igurna and Gorlaus thing? It's like, oh, it's not his wife, it's his daughter, and he's like really like really on the nose about it. I think it's good, it works, but but like when Merlin freaks out about Guinevere being Irish, right? I was like, okay, well, look, the name Guinevere is insanely Welsh. Okay, that is not an Irish name. Like, there's no chance that she's Irish. Okay, like her name would have been Finnabar or something like that if she was Irish, right? And like it would not have appeared into Welsh then as Guinevere. Like that just would have been no, that's too big of a sound change. Okay, the PQ, whatever, right? And so it's just like, no, so like it's like there's no chance in hell that she was Irish. Okay, so like also why does she have black hair? Her name pretty much just means blondie. Like, like so, this is what I mean by me being nitpicky about this stuff, but I still enjoy the story. He since he has a fantasy approach, I'm much more forgiving of Lawhead.
Right.
So.
It's crazy how inserting fantasy elements gives you a level of phrase went out of my head, but it helps you to forgive things a lot easier. Like you can just allow yourself to be immersed in the story all by inserting some little fantasy element, and you can just be like, oh, it's fantasy, we're good. And so but and I mean I find that with all sorts of things, even things that are supposed to be modern or set on modern day Earth or whatever it is, you insert some sort of level of fantasy elements to it, and it just suddenly it becomes way more believable. Suspension of disbelief. That's the phrase I was looking for. You can suspend your disbelief way easier, and I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting. I've picked on Lawhead a lot, but I still think the books are fine. It's funny though. I think of the 5 books I've read, right, that I definitely like the first 2 the most because they're the most like they're like pre-Arthurian in a lot of ways, right? Like they're and they lack that Christianity. Even I feel like that the strict Arthurian stuff really kind of needs, but they're just fun. They're like kind of weird and interesting and new,
right?
In a lot of ways. So,
well, I mean, for me, a huge part of it, maybe more than it should be, is the fact that they're bards. That just because I basically think of myself as a bard. That's what I'd be, is a bard or a gleeman or something like that, who is a traveling storyteller essentially. And because of that, like I connect to these characters so much quicker because like I understand them. I understand their desire for storytelling. I understand their desire for music, in a way that very few other characters can ever do or be. And so it's just, for me, that's a nifty part of the story, because I just, here's an automatic connection to these characters. And it was cool.
I'd have to look more into it. It seemed odd to me that he conflates druids with bards. He makes them one and the same.
Well, he kind of, but he also he makes the druids be like, all the druids are bards type thing. But also not all bards are druids or something like that. And there's like the druidic culture is dying out, or is whatever, being oppressed, suppressed, whatever you want to call it. And basically, again, Merlin becomes the last druid. He's trained as a druid specifically, whereas Taliesin wasn't trained as a druid. And so there's some interesting aspects to the way that he decides to do that. But
the druid thing is an interesting point on, speaking of historical accuracy, and I mentioned this again in Discord. Like in the Arthurian Age stuff by Pogue or whatever, he doesn't have druids at all. And to me, that seems more historically accurate, that they wouldn't be around either in the 5th or the 6th century. Really, that the Romans suppressed them pretty much finished in the 2nd century, right? Which is well before this Arthurian stuff. Like Anglesey or whatever, right? Like rectum there. Anyways, so like maybe they could survive in Ireland, but at the same time, Ireland's converted by the time you get to Arthurian stuff too. So like, really,
there's a lot of like, if just the general person off the street, you go talk to him about who oppressed the druids, and they're going to say, it's the Christians, which that's not entirely true. In fact, it's pretty much not true at all, because it was like you mentioned, the Romans had cleared them out before Christianity took over, or Catholicism
before the Romans converted,
took over.
For sure.
And so it's an interesting misconception that a lot of people have. But.
Yeah, it is, and that's part of the reason I'm kind of harsh on Cornwell's books, because then you have people almost certainly believing it, right? They're probably almost certainly, like, most people have a tendency not to know jack about late antiquity and early medieval period, right? And so they're like, oh yeah, yeah, the Christians were those jerks and they killed all the Druids, and like that's like not even close. What, you know what I mean? So like, so, but it's, oh man, that's in my nitpickiness. The only thing that I have that it's like interesting that can kind of show, besides the fact that historical records, there's a good chance they're not going to be historically completely accurate anyways. They're not going to give us the whole picture. It's like sure, maybe there could be a druid, but like the Old English word "dri," which I mentioned before, actually, and "dri" is like a word for wizard or sorcerer in Old English, and "dricraft" is like magic, kind of, right? And "dri" comes from the Proto-Brythonic word, late Common Brythonic, dru, or something like that, which is the word for druid. Right, you know what I mean? So like, so that doesn't mean druids existed, but they could have just still been in the vernacular and being talked about or whatever. So, and I mean the traditions of Welsh stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if they're talked about. That's just where it comes from. But
I personally, well, it depends on the story that you're going to tell. But if you're going with an old Merlin, with an aged wizard or Merlin, I like him being the last of the druids. Yeah, like that's it, where it
is appealing,
ancient. There's some things about that can be really interesting. If you're going for a younger Merlin, then I don't need him to be druid. Although Merlin deals with that storyline well, so I'm fine with it. But the thing about Merlin is they completely forget that Mordred is a druid.
Yeah.
Just completely skip over that part of the storyline. And how long is it between season 3 and season 4? Because like he grows significantly.
Yeah, he does.
There's all sorts of stories. I have like this anthology series that's set in that Merlin universe that I think would be awesome. Like they set it in between seasons 3 and 4. So basically when Arthur is king, is like truly king, he's got his court, his round table and everything. And it's like these stories that are going on in those, I don't know, it feels about 5 years. It feels like it's about 5 years between season 3 and 4. And so you just take some and you go tell Merlin's version of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. You go tell that tale, or you go do some things with Lancelot and bring in some of these other characters and just have like these one-off stories that you can actually go explore them rather than just completely going over. It's mostly because I want more Merlin.
Right. Yeah, no, I feel you there.
I'm being honest. But I also would love to see like that final sequence in the final episode series finale with Merlin and I feel like you could pick it up right there, or even go back to, instead of during World War I, and have Arthur come back. I feel like there's a story that could be told there.
That'd be nice. I'd probably watch. Probably enjoy it. I mean, I shouldn't say, but yeah.
just bring the team back. You get that. The problem is they killed off all the other characters. So like, even if you wanted to do a series that's set after the final episode, but still in the past, and then just incorporate the characters, like the only characters that you would have left to play with is basically Merlin and Gwen.
Yeah,
and like Merlin's great, but
is alive. But
he's so old.
Everyone else is dead.
Right. Yeah. It's just like I want more. I want adventures with Lancelot and Gawain. He's called Gawain in the series, because those are like the two best characters in that show. Leon's great too.
Yeah, Leon's a good addition.
I don't know. I would just love more of that, more to that show, because they could do stuff.
Leon's
just
alive,
do stuff like one-off.
I guess he's kind of an extra, but anyways,
right. But like he's not a character out of Arthurian lore, but
right, yeah,
he's a great character in the show.
Guy there. So yeah. There's speaking of, are there any like other? I have like a final question before we close, but besides that, we're not there yet. I'm not going to keep you forever, but is there any like other like? I don't adaptations. I can't think of any video games, but like any other movies or shows of like Arthurian stuff that you like.
Well, like I acknowledge that it's not a great Arthurian thing, but I have so much fun watching it, and that's King Arthur: Legend of the Sword.
Okay,
Like,
yeah.
it's just an action flick, but it's so much fun, and it's got great music. That's the biggest one. Um,
I've only seen that once, but
there's got
I
to
do
be
remember
more
enjoying it.
things.
So
Like it's enjoyable as like schlock, as like
yeah,
action with Arthurian flavor schlock type
yeah.
thing, and
That's
not being like a true Arthurian thing. But
yeah.
it was
That's
fun to watch. So, but
I'm not as big into like television as I am as books. I think that's obvious, but
right,
I just not right. And
right,
I like Legend of the Sword. I don't really remember much about it. I probably should rewatch it. It's been a minute. I do remember one of my first King Arthur memories was watching that. I think 2004 King Arthur. It's like very Roman, like
yeah,
historical.
yeah.
I
Hmm.
don't remember much about it besides the fact that I remember watching it with my brother. um, I know there's that like '60s musical called Camelot. I haven't seen.
Hmm.
Um,
Everybody raves about that one. I
yeah,
actually don't watch that one, but there's a lot of things that I don't care if I ever watch, um, and a lot of things that just don't interest me. But
yeah,
the that I do remember that old, or the like 2004 or whatever one. It's got a great cast other than Keira Knightley plays Gwen, and I'm like, I don't like that. I don't like for one, I don't like her as an actress as it is, but I also don't like her in that role. I don't feel like it
yeah,
works. Um, but anyways, that's a decent film.
yeah. I mean, I
It's
have a
fine.
tendency to think that medieval film, like movies and anything like that, are like not. They're way too grayscale. They don't really do justice to
Mhm.
medieval period. Um,
Right. I
oh,
would love to see
we forgot the Green Knight.
more. That's such an interesting film because like I disliked it,
Yeah.
but I thought so much about it after I watched it. And
Yes.
like the individual pieces, I was like, this is so cool how they're doing these individual pieces, but what the heck are they doing? It's
Yeah.
basically
No, I feel you
my
there.
reaction the entire time. But like there was a lot of really cool stuff. Um, the his whole journey and the way that they approached that journey was really interesting, like actually fleshing it out, telling some
Uh-huh.
individual stories. It felt very video gamey, like, oh, you do
Yeah.
this task and just suddenly your axe
Yeah.
appears type thing. But
It is. Yeah.
it also it felt very, it was very atmospheric.
Very.
And there's
Yeah.
a lot of things I do want to go back and rewatch it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There are some things I liked. Yeah. It's very atmospheric. The head scene
Mhm.
is very just cool historically, like as far as the saint is concerned. It's actually, a
Right.
thing. But and then I think they overdid the wife advances on that
Right.
was
I
weird.
Yes.
Like I'm like
It's like,
because then
can I
he
leave
kisses the
now?
Lord, but I'm like, is he gonna do something else to
That
him?
was
Because
weird.
this is like weird as hell. So like, so
Right.
I
I
don't
had
know, man.
never interpreted my reading of the book in that manner. I was like, okay,
Yeah, I really like
choice,
the
but
ending though. I think that worked. The puppet scene I think
yeah.
worked pretty well. And
Right.
then
There's a lot of creative choices in terms of
mhm,
like storytelling from
yeah,
just like what you're seeing on screen is very
yeah,
interesting and very very artsy film. A
yeah.
lot of good things to it, but it's
The
weird.
man, my one complaint, okay, my one like kind of like that really makes me feel about it. Besides the fact that the adaptation approach is interesting, um, is Gowan is such a okay. The best term for him is an inappropriate slang word, and I'm gonna type it to
I
you.
don't mind.
Uh, that's
Um,
what he is. Okay, that
yeah.
is like,
Hmm. Right. Which
and
Merlin gets it right.
yeah, it's just like
But
I don't know. It's just a funny,
yeah.
interesting. It's funny because that does seem like that actually doesn't seem like a terrible choice.
Hmm.
Taking the medieval story into a modern setting, it really doesn't, but it's still like really cringe. Just to put it
Right.
that way. Like it's so.
Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot of interesting good and a lot of interesting bad choices in it,
Yeah,
or at least interesting, really weird verging on bad choices,
Yeah,
questionable.
so yeah,
But yeah,
it's
but
an
I
interesting movie.
love the atmosphere of it. Just
Yes.
sitting in the theater watching it, it's very interesting atmosphere, and that was fun.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, we'll see what else comes from Arthurian stuff. I haven't watched that
Yeah.
much, I guess. Yeah, one thing that actually does come to mind when I think of Arthurian cinema or whatever is an anime. I don't watch a lot of animes either. But and this one's not really Arthurian, I should say. But I remember watching. I went through like a little period, like around the same time I watched Merlin, actually, where I just watched a good amount of anime. I don't watch a lot of anime, and I never really have. But there's just chunks, where I'll just watch some or whatever.
Right.
And I watched. Gosh, the fantasy. It's anime have way too garbage names, and I can't freaking remember what it is. And so let me look up what exactly it's called, because it's poorly named. Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. I know specifically it's the Unlimited Blade Works version, right? There's a lot of Fate animes. There's probably a couple Fate Stay Night animes, particularly the Unlimited Blade Works one, which has a nice animation style, which very new, not like 90s quality, but nice and new looking. And it is an interesting, if you've never watched these Fate things, is that the whole point of them is these magicians summon like a hero to fight for them, and they fight each other, and whoever's the last one standing, I think it's the Holy Grail, actually. So I'm not remembering exactly. But and I remember watching some other ones after watching Unlimited Blade Works because I liked it. And then like the next one I watched, it was like rated M though, and it was like pretty mature, and I was like, oh, that's a little weird. And this one's like more tame, and not horny Japanese thing. And so like it's mostly following this girl and this boy, right, who summon these avatars pretty much, right? And I don't even remember who the hell summons them, but someone summons they're just called by titles. I can't remember. Like Archer. Like they'll be called Archer, and you want to figure out their name. Because if you figure out their actual identity, then you can figure out their weakness sense, right? Like I think Gilgamesh is one of the characters, right? And there's like Circe or something like that. They're mythological. Or like Lancer is Cuchulainn, which is dope as hell. I love the myth of Cuchulainn, right? And so I mean so when he's like when they do like their ultimate ability, like it gives away their identity, right? And so he's like Guy Bog or whatever, which is the name of the spear. I was like, oh, that's freaking cool. That's cool. Because like, why the hell would he appear in anything? Japanese anime of all things, right? And so I mean, like, Cuchulainn's way cooler than Hercules. So anyways, but fighter, I think that's what she's called, maybe the fighter class type of thing. Is King Arthur, but it's a woman. So it's just like interesting. But anyways, that's literally all I was rounding up to say, pretty much. So like, yeah. That's pretty normal though, because it's almost always the same fighter. In some ways, fighter or whoever her Arturia, I think that's what her actual name is like one of the main characters. She appears in a lot of the Fate stuff as far as the board. But again, I only really watched Unlimited Blade Works. It's pretty short. It's probably like one season or something. So. Anyways,
the only other Arthurian adaptation that I am currently aware of happening is Pendragon Cycle.
Oh yeah, I forgot
and I hope it's going to be good, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think they did a Warlord Chronicles one a few years ago.
Yeah, they did. So as different people, but yeah, Warlord Chronicles has an adaptation. Might still be going.
I don't think it is, but I don't maybe.
Anyways,
I haven't seen it. I don't know.
I would really love a series that's like Merlin in terms of like how good the storytelling is, where it's just good Arthurian storytelling, fantasy. It's clean. Just something along the lines of Merlin that I could be a part of. That would be wonderful. But I'll have to write it if I want to.
Contact T.
Yeah,
he's qualified. I promise.
Hey, although all the people, most of the people in Arthurian or in Pendragon Cycle are no names, still with more credits than I have. But
Yeah, I looked at it the other day and I was like, I don't know any of these people besides that one girl whose name is Brett, which is a terrible name
Yeah.
for a girl. And she looks like Ben Shapiro. At least that's what I think. But I really don't know her at all.
Those are the two jokes about her. So, but yeah. No, I'm excited for it. I'm hopeful that it's good. I don't know that it will be good, but I would hope that it is.
Yeah, I'll probably watch it if I remember. It's supposed to come out this year, I think, right? So
it was supposed to come out like 2 years ago, but they didn't film it till last year or something like that. And yeah, so it's gone much slower than it should have. I'm scared that it's only going to be a 1-season show and that they're going to cover
like nothing,
the first 2 books, and that's it. Like that's what I'm scared of. I know they're doing the bowl dance. Like I know that sequence is going to be in there.
Cool.
I know.
Interesting.
I know. Well, Brett Cooper plays Gagneta, and so hopefully they adapt that storyline.
Oh my gosh, that was so brutal.
That was unexpected.
Yeah,
but
holy crap.
Like I know basically what I'm seeing is, or what I saw was that they've adapted up to the end of book 2.
Interesting.
Which like 8 episodes is kind of short
for
short time novels. For 2 entire books, and so
but also span a lot of time,
right? And who knows if they're going to insert anything from Aurelia into that or not. Like I don't have any idea, because that's about that same timeline too, from what I understand. So I don't know. Sure. Anyways, I hope it's good. I hope it's good. I hope it's faithful. But I won't know until I watch it. So
yeah, we shall see.
Yeah.
But
I'm sick of stupid 8 episode seasons of TV shows.
No, I agree with you.
They don't always have to be 25, but 12 to 15 is good. I like 12 to 15.
Yeah.
Usually. But anyways,
there are options. Yeah, anyways, we've been talking now for 2 hours, so I kind of want to just close with I was thinking about Raph's video, okay? Before this, and
4 hours.
It's been a minute since I watched it, right? I watched it when it was new, but I remember one thing that he touched on. Raph always has this Marxist approach, which is always very enlightening and interesting, I think, personally. As much as I hate it on postmodernism, but so it's like, it's not my favorite for me personally, but I do find it worthwhile in a sense of perspective, right? And so I mean, like, so I appreciate Raph doing that work. The one thing I think he really talked about in his video was the politics, which I don't feel like we really need to touch on. I mean, yes, that fiction, especially medieval fiction, is going to be political to whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you have liberals romances that are like Perilous Vows is particularly hateful of Jews for some reason, right? You know what I mean? Even though most romances aren't, right? Or like Parts of Aldo is particularly like kind of progressive, like for Islamic people, right? And so it's like, which is interesting, right? You know what I mean? So like, but his other thing though is, and this is kind of what Lavi Tidar is getting in, and By Force Alone though, is that these knights are really just gangsters. And I'm like,
yeah,
is that true though? Okay, so because when I read Le Morte d'Arthur, yes, I get that vibe a lot. Okay,
yeah,
but that's a pretty late Arthurian piece. Also, it's written by one specific person that maybe was doing stuff, but
he himself might have been.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of these romances are written by knights or written by people around knights. You know, Parts of All is written by a knight. And but I don't know. I just feel like, do you think there's worth in these stories? Maybe even particularly the more romantic ones and less the modern retellings. But I guess just, do you think there's worth in the stories? Are they all just gangsters? Is it all just like I do what I want type of, like, I don't know, because I when I read the stuff, I don't get that feeling, you know, like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, for example, doesn't come off like that at all to me, right?
No. Well, so the short answer is yes. Let's see if I can flesh it out clearly and concisely. Yes, I do think there's worth to them. In terms of if you are taking the they're all gangsters approach, then there's a particular amount of worth in the idea of the whole concept of what is King Arthur's court, what is it for, and that is taking these and pointing them towards a common good goal, which is the whole. That's the whole thing with basically the entire story of Le Morte d'Arthur. Is there's all these desperate knights who are going around doing whatever they want. Arthur comes in, takes control, sets them into. It takes his entire reign to where they are then choosing right over might, which is, it used to be might makes right. And so now they've kind of changed to, okay, we're going to do what's right because it's the right thing to do, not because, and what's right isn't what we say because we're the strongest. So that he makes that shift and towards, that's the entire thing. Once a Future King also touches on that. But Mallory takes this idea and builds that into the entire story. So once they finally achieve goodness, if you want to say it that way, once they finally achieve what the kingdom set out to be, there's nowhere to go but down. And so Mallory says, okay, so how can we get there in a believable way? Well, let's take this one thing that is above and beyond anything else that they could possibly search for, and that is holiness. So they go after the Holy Grail. Mm-hmm. And very rapidly they find out these people are not worthy. This person's not worthy. Even Gawain, who's one of the greatest knights, not worthy. And so you come down to these three people who are pure, unblemished, whatever you want to call them, which is Bors and Percival and Galahad. Mm-hmm. And they're the ones that go after the Grail. One of them dies. One of them gets taken to heaven, and the other one goes to live as a monk. And that's the end. After that, the Grail quest has been achieved. The kingdom crumbles very quickly. The kingdom crumbles because it's basically once you get to as good as you can possibly be, and then you may start making problems for yourself, which is how Arthur's kingdom crumbles in that story. He gets into infighting between him and his knights and him and Lancelot, and admittedly Lancelot causes a lot of those problems. But it's also Arthur's refusal to deal with it before it gets to that point. And it's just a lot of things like that where they make the problems, and they're in such a good place that they have to make problems for themselves so that they have something to deal with. And it causes the collapse of the kingdom. And so in that way, if you're looking at it from they're all just gangsters perspective, that's a very worthwhile story to tell, very worthwhile thing to understand and to learn about. And I think we're seeing it in, not to get political, but I think we're seeing it in the United States at this point, even. And so, yeah, it's useful to look at these stories, look at these histories, and histories in the sense that they are historical, but they're not true history. They're not fact, but they have some historical things and ideas and lessons that were very common in those days. And we can look back to that and bring them into our modern worldview and see them and understand them and learn from them. So yes, I do think in that way, I definitely think that they are worthwhile. If you're taking the approach from things like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where he's not actually a gangster type character, where he gets sent on this quest because he plays the game and he makes this decision, and he decides the best thing for him to do is to follow through on this vow that he has made. That in and of itself is a worthy aspiration, worthy thing to look to and to understand. Tolkien has a great underlying idea in his Middle-earth works about vows and what they mean and how you cannot break them. You should not break them. And it's directly from the Bible. It comes from Christianity, where a vow is basically the most sacred thing you can do. And if you were to break that vow, it's going to have repercussions. And so Gawain and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, he makes this vow to, okay, I will go seek you in a year's time for you to repay this this blow that I gave you, based off this game that we mutually agreed upon. And so seeing his willingness to hit, well, for one, to start off with his reluctance to go back after this, like, obviously he doesn't want to die, but he also, so like, he's dealing with himself, with his own flesh, fighting with his own flesh, and these ideas of, I am mortal, I don't want to die, I can't just pick my head up and keep talking and then right away, I'm not a Green Knight like that. Which then, that whole theme follows through with him getting the girdle and everything, and a whole bunch of stuff. But you see his conflict within himself, in that he's still, even with that conflict within himself, chooses to take the right path and to go fulfill his vow. I think there's a lot of benefit to any of those types of things that you can see. And it, in many ways, that's the same story as is in Le Morte d'Arthur. He kept his vow, and now he's going to his own destruction. So I don't know. I think yes. Hopefully that was clear enough.
No, I think you got your point well executed there. Allocated. But yeah, no, I think I need to better justice Le Morte d'Arthur than I could, but I think there's definitely a moral sense, right? There's a moral dilemma that is often yes, there's political things, definitely, right? I mean, like, they fight Saracens over Saxons in the medieval stuff, right? Like, in historical retellings, they're going to fight Saxons because that's historically accurate, right? And you can see the transition when you read something like King Horn, where the Saracens roll up to England like Vikings, right? You know what I mean? They're described like Vikings, but they're Saracens because, you know, they had recently had Viking problems, and now they have Crusades and Saracen problems or whatever. So right, so, like, in that sense, that's a fantasy in a sense, even those medieval ones. But there's always this dilemma, right? And so, like, yeah, you said even the vows in the Christian context, but also just the oath thing is, like, super. I'm not so sure about other. I know that there's, like, no rash oaths or oaths, and even Merlin in the Pendragon cycle is telling Arthur not to swear oaths or whatever. Right, but in Germanic stuff, this stuff always comes back to haunt you, right? There's always some problem, right? You know what I mean? Like, hence why Germanic stuff always ends in death and tragedy. It's almost always, like, it's actually really similar to the Arthurian stuff, which ends in failure, right? In most cases, or at least the whole story itself does, right? And but also historically it did kind of too, anyways. But so, like, but yeah, something like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it's just like, yes, it's about oaths, it's about honor, right? It's about this honesty, and it's also about like chastity in a sense, right? Like because, like, he's like, oh, repay, but he doesn't repay the kisses, right? Type of thing. So like, and so it's just like interesting stuff, right? Like, actual dilemmas that would have mattered to those people, right? You know what I mean? Like, and they're worthwhile to think about, because, well, I'm not, and there really aren't any knights these days, right? And lords and ladies and whatnot. There's still problems, you know what I mean? And those problems are still pertinent. And just like the politics stuff is still pertinent in a lot of ways, right? So, I mean, like, whether it's a more fantastical approach or a more historical approach. And in fact, speaking of the politics, I think Arthuriana, at least in the Middle Ages, has this integrating aspect. Like, speaking of like, maybe a good aspect of the politics, when you read it's a Matter of Britain, right? And you read Lacheman's Brut. Okay, I haven't read it completely, but Lacheman's Brut is like, it's the first Arthurian mention in English. Okay, and he goes through this history, and Arthur's the good guy. Well, who was Arthur fighting against, though, in this history? The Saxons, which are Lacheman's ancestors. So Lacheman's the bad guy? No, Lacheman's just an ancestor, a descendant. You know what I mean? But, like, really, what's happening there is this integration, kind of more of a British identity over strictly a English and a Welsh identity, right? The Anglo-Saxons started feeling a lot more sympathetic in some sense to the Welsh, because they were having the same problem that the Welsh had from the Saxons. The Saxons are now getting that from the Normans, right? The Normans were the upper class, right? They were the ones in charge, right? And they persecuted the Saxons in some sense, right? And so it's just like, and so this sense of identity is coming, like, right, like the now these Anglo-Saxons feel the sympathy for the Welsh, right? And they now identify with Arthur in a sense, right? And so it's just like, it's pretty interesting in that aspect. You definitely have tales that are like very barbaric, slaughtering children and stuff like that. But like a lot of them have good stuff. Even Percival, okay, Sir Percival of Gallus, the one Middle English poem about Percival. Okay, we mentioned already, it's a parody, right? It's funny, right? Like the second line is about, I gotta tell you a word or three or something like that, which literally is like a joke, right? Because it's 2,000 lines long, right? So like and he so one of the things that Percival is always about moral stuff anyways, right? Because Percival's problem is that he sees the Fisher King, and he could free the Fisher King from his pain just by asking a question, and he doesn't. Right? And then the whole rest of the story is him trying to fix that problem, pretty much, right? And there is some solace, right? Because there is a fixing of the problem. And yeah, well, not if you read Detroit's version, because it stops in the middle. But I mean, like, but even then, like in the Middle English run, which was a joke romance almost. If you read all the Percival stories, pretty much what happens is he leaves his mom, and his mom immediately dies, and he doesn't know. All right, and he feels bad about it later when his like cousin tells him or whatever. But she's berating him more for the Fisher King stuff, right? And but in the Middle English version of Percival, she doesn't die. In fact, she lives, and after he's won this glory and fame with stuff like, in fact, he's become a king. He's married this queen. He's like, he remembers his mother, and so he goes back, and she's being harried by a giant, right? And he's like, saves her. He cures her of her like madness that she had like kind of suffered in living in the forest and whatnot. And then, because forests are bad, and then he takes her to his castle, right, where he's king, right? So I mean, like, it has this like really kind of sweet ending, even though it's a joke, right? You know what I mean? So like, and don't forget your mama, or whatever, right? Like, and so like, it I think that's pretty normal for these things. They're not just like jokes. Even like Tidar's book is, even though it's a joke, it's got some good stuff in it, right? You know what I mean? Like Tidar always has good stuff in his books, and so I mean, I think in a sense, yeah, you can view them as gangsters, because most of these things are written, at least if they're not written by like the knights themselves or whatever, it's written by the people whose patrons are the knights or whatever, right? And so like right, and so you could say, oh, they're just treating them nicer, there's like lower class people don't really appear that much in these romances really at all, right? And that's true, you know what I mean? Like, and so there's definitely some observations to be made there, but there definitely is almost always a moral dilemma, right, somewhere in these things. And that is a big part of the story, right? Whatever it is, right? So
there's Arthuriana is always extremely thematically heavy, and I don't even think that's because the authors are specifically saying, oh, I'm going to write a book about this theme. I think it's more of, that's just a natural progression of the story that they are telling. And I think that's why things like, to some degree, why things like Once and Future King or Buried Giant didn't work that well for me, is because it feels a lot like the author says, oh, I want to write a book about this theme. Let's set it in Arthuriana. And because of that, especially with Buried Giant, I wanted him to dig even deeper into the theme that he was exploring.
It is pretty shallow.
He didn't. And I feel like had he just told a story, it would have gone much deeper into that theme. So I don't know. It's just I think the best Arthurian stories are the ones that are thematic, due to the story that's being told. And
Yeah.
Sir Gawain and Green Knight is a great example of that. I also, Gawain has his shield on the front of the shield. It has a 5-pointed star, and on the back of the shield it has Virgin Mary. And I don't remember what the 5 points of the star represent. In for him, one of them is chastity. I think one of them is probably honor, stuff like that. And I don't remember what all they are supposed to represent, but when you see that and you then you look at the stories that Gawain is a part of, that accurately depicts Gawain. I don't feel like Barry Giant did that.
Yeah.
But when you look at these stories like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and you see these concepts, these themes, these virtues that are being represented in that Gawain is striving for, I feel like it works a lot better in the stories. So that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think that reminds me of things where a lot of the reason I gripe on like these modern edgy things, as much as I like them sometimes, right? Like First Law, right, comes to mind, right? Or Bernard Cornwell, Warlord Chronicles, is that they're edgy. They come off as shallow. They seem to miss the point. Okay, something like Malazan, it's also edgy. Seems to hit something. You know what I mean? At least better, in my opinion. And I think, well, a lot of these people, yeah, almost certainly sometimes did terrible things, right, or did questionable things, right. I think I'm tired of this trope that you get in modern literature, where everyone's terrible, right? I mean, like, there's a lot of good people, okay? There are a lot of bad people, okay? But there are a lot of good people, and there are good things about a lot of people, okay? Like, and there are good things about, I would say, about most people, right? Or probably everyone. Hard to look and see in some things, or at least to focus on. I don't know if you should sometimes, but I mean, like, like, and there's compassion to be had. There's understanding to be had, and I'm like, even myself, I look at like the book I wrote sometimes. I'm like, oh, this book is full of edgy dummies, or something like that, right? And I'm just like, why?
Right.
Like, because like there's good stuff. There's always good stuff, right? I mean, like, there's lots of good people, right? And like, not everyone has to be terrible, and not everything has to be terrible, right? And that's like kind of the one thing I'm kind of annoyed of with like modern writing in some sense. You know what I mean? Grimdark is such a useless label in the first place, but it's so pointless as a book anyways, if it is a book. So I mean, like,
right.
Because what does it do? It doesn't do anything. So I mean, like, anyhow. So I think there's stuff to be had. Pretty much is all I'm saying though. And so, but and I think Arthuriana will continue to be popular. To be honest, like, I know in some sense it helps with British identity, and as long as Britain remains a country or something, blah blah blah. Once the future king. But like at the same time, it has other aspects to it that are long lasting. So, anyways, if you have any closing remarks, feel free to say them. Yeah.
My closing remark will just be that I choose to believe that King Arthur was real.
Oh, okay.
And
we gotta go for another 3 hours.
There's a lot that ties into that, and I'm not saying that the myth as we know it is true, is accurate. All I'm saying is that I do believe that there was a character. He may not have even been named Arthur, but there was a king who built a kingdom, a realm that was hugely influential, and who knows, it may have even been Charlemagne, like a lot of people speculate. But I feel like there's okay, this is a little bit weird. When Disney bought Star Wars, they decided to relegate everything that had been written, all the Star Wars books that had previously been written, to legends. They call them legends. There's these books, and what they said at that time is there's always a bit of truth to legends. And I feel like that applies to the King Arthur myth. Whether or not he was real in the way that we like to pretend, is beyond, that's not the point. I think the importance of him is in the stories and in the ideas and in the themes and in what he invokes in us, and how we as readers, as consumers of literature, what we take from it and how we choose to move on from there. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's good. I don't really have a comment on historical King Arthur, but because it'd be too long. But no,
Right.
no, yeah, I do think there's aspects of. I mean, like, I think people need heroes. I mean, no one's
Right.
perfect, obviously. Well, I guess some people. Anyway, but I mean, like, no one's perfect in a sense, right? And so, but people
Right.
need heroes, and I think these stories, these myths. Myth is not just myth. In a modern sense, has this tendency to mean a falsity, right? But really, myth just means story. That's all it means. And a story is to convey truth, whether the story in and of itself is something that really happened. It still conveys something that is true.
Right.
Right.
You can have a story that is true without it being real.
Yeah, crazy, huh? Anyways,
Yeah.
yes. Anyways, that I think we're good. So you guys can go subscribe to T. I assume you already have, but his channel's gonna be in the description, of course, and yeah. So T just reached 1,000 subscribers. I guess T and his sister, but she's hardly ever on anymore. So,
busy
darn.
life. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do something at least for celebrate. Haven't figured out what yet, so we'll see.
Okay, cool. We'll see. Congratulations, and thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yes, thanks for inviting me. This is fun. Yeah, good chat. 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Easy. It's easy for us.
Pretty sure. I'm pretty sure the last time we talked it was like 3 hours. So, but
I think so too. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Rookie numbers. Anyways, okay. Yes. Adios, everyone.
Ciao.
Not to do.